It's hard to recognise it just from the chords, which line I'm up to, really.
Oh, do you want to hear your words?
No, God, we have never heard them once, you fool. No wonder we've been getting it wrong.
I'm hearing you up here.
Wonderful for you.
They're lovely.
Wonder if Ron Richards is free tomorrow.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Gear There and Everywhere. I am Sam, and I'm joined as always by my co-hosts Michael, Paul, Ryan, and Dom. And today we have a special guest, Marc Daniel Nelson. Marc, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, do I really have to? I found these jokers on YouTube and contacted them because I can't stop watching the channel. I mean, it's just so great. And I mean, I'm a little probably out of my league when it comes to like the hyper detail of guitars and stuff, but the passion is just phenomenal. But a little background on me, I'm just a music guy in the sense I do the tracking and the producing and mixing side here in Los Angeles, and a massive Beatles fan, and reached out to you guys and said, let's chat. I'd love to be a part of the discussion in any way, you know, tell my universal stories that I've encountered over the years and experiences, and debate. That's the point. I feel like the cool thing about this show is, you know, Paul, Ryan, Sam, Dom, Michael, you guys are all like your own universes. You came together to talk about your passion, gear, and guitars, and recording, and Abbey Road, and the guys that made the records, and the photos that you guys all share and have, and if it was a flat sanded off nut versus if it was a burn mark on the pickup thing, and Paul recreating everything down to
We haven't gotten to the
volume
sanded
pots.
nut yet. That's just a spoiler alert.
Oh, great. Yeah, I think it's just, I'm just fascinated with all that stuff. Hyper detail is so cool. So thank you guys for having me. A little bit of background other than that is just,
Well, that's
I
a
love the
bit
Beatles.
humble for you to just say I'm a music guy, because for those who don't know, Marc is an amazing LA music engineer and producer and mixer. I mean, you've worked with Eric Burden from The Animals for many years. You've worked alongside Geoff Emerick, some of our favorite, you know, engineers and producers. So you also have the best looking setup of all of us, like 4K, like blurred background. I just want to comment on that.
It's not blurred, it's just the lens. You know, I went to film school after recording school and learned a lot in college about filmmaking and treating lenses like guitars or microphones. They're all very similar, where it's the passion of,
Got the high f-stop or whatever, right?
it's just a 50 millimeter lens that's, you know, just set just right. That makes everything, because this room is pretty small, that just makes everything look blurry, but naturally blurry, versus it look like the zoom effect that, you know, you hate when you see somebody put like a beach background and everything's blue screened and stuff like that. But the cool thing about technology is we're allowed to just keep cameras set up for zoom and stuff, which is what I have normally, and force of habit, you just turn it on and you're ready to go.
And is that Pee Wee Herman behind you?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. So I got that when I was a kid, and I found it again like 2 weeks before he died, and I put it up there randomly after 28 years or something of seeing it the last time. It was in a box my parents gave me. You know, they're starting to like shrink down their house, and they're giving me boxes every time they visit with stuff, and that was in there. So it was just an odd timing of that whole thing. But yeah,
So it's your fault, is what you're saying.
could be.
That happened to me. I was in an O.J. Simpson fixation and watched that 30 for 30 documentary on repeat, and then 2 weeks later he died. So I think I personally killed O.J. Simpson.
But that's okay. I mean,
You're welcome, America.
You're a hero. Here's the keys to the city.
exactly.
The
Timing
keys to
is
the
always
Bronco.
odd in the sense of there's always stuff like that cooking. You know, the coincidences, and
Yeah, it's kind of.
I swear half the time when something like that happens that's really weird, you start questioning, what are we in some alternate? And if we are, can I make it more alternate? Like have John
You know-
Lennon come back or something.
There's a really weird story. I mean, obviously, you guys are all familiar with Buddy Holly and the last Winter Dance Party tour where he died and all that.
You look like Buddy Holly, and I've just realized it. That's crazy.
Me?
Oh, both of you, I guess. I meant Dom.
I
but
think
wow.
it's that Dom and we both had the horn glasses on.
If
I think I'm tripping a bit. Wow.
Hey, Sue.
And Sam's got the guitar. Oh my
Yeah.
God, what is happening?
Oh my God.
It's a Buddy
Guys,
Holly
you're gonna stop.
podcast
You're
now.
gonna kill Buddy Holly. Please.
Right, be careful.
But like, there was a coin flip between like Richie Valens or
Dion.
like
It was
Yeah.
Dion and one of the.
Tommy Allsup.
Tommy Alsop,
Yep.
like Waylon Jennings was part of it.
Dion was there. Dion.
Yeah, Dion
Down in the
Uichi.
Belmonts. Yeah.
Yeah.
He
Abraham
was going to
Martin
be on
and
the
John,
plane,
right?
but he lost a coin flip.
I had no idea that. I was just listening to the record that Phil Spector produced of his
I mean,
in
no
the
offense
70s.
to the other guy, but I'm kind of glad we got the early '60s Dion stuff.
God,
It's
Ryan,
wild.
get out of
that's
here.
terrible, Ryan.
Early 60s Buddy Holly.
Well, it wasn't Buddy Holly. It was one of the Crickets or something, right?
But, well, Buddy Holly had right before they took off, Waylon Jennings was like, yeah, I'm not coming on the plane with you guys. So, and Buddy Holly's like, well, I hope your bus freezes. And Waylon Jennings goes, well, I hope your old plane crashes. And for years later, he thought he caused it. And,
I think there's giant glasses in the field.
yeah,
They
If I
found his
remember
glasses.
in Iowa.
Yeah.
that's
I
right.
think- Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous, to be honest. You got to walk all the way into the field and it's still owned by a farmer, and he's like, "Get out of here, you rascal!"
Right. It's
Well,
kinda
Mark,
tacky.
if we could start it off a little bit with gear, because
Sure.
I mean, you collect pro audio, preamps and microphones, but you do have some cool guitars. I mean, we shouldn't skim over that. Like, you have
Yeah,
a
I-
68.
Was gonna put them around, but then I lost track of our time, and then you texted me, and I was like, "Oh, 4:30 means 5:30. Okay, let's." So I didn't get to grab them, but yeah, I have a lot of John Lennon-y guitars. I have a 68 160. I just got that 67 Casino, which is like the George version. It's a little more orange. I know Sam and we were talking a little bit about that, which I find fascinating to think that two colors that were probably almost near matching, John and George's, would change colors over time that drastically.
In different
I had no
ways.
idea.
Yeah, it's really cool. But you are mostly
I had no
a
idea that
John
could happen.
guy, right? John Lennon's your
Yeah. John is my guy. I like him. He is my favorite Beatle, and probably favorite kind of person in the sense of like being passionate about what they do and stuff like that. But he's great. So most of my guitars, if not all of them, are based around that. I have, which Dom told me, I have a Chinese Rickenbacker 320.
Sorry to break it
Well,
to
that's
you.
okay, because I bought it for cheap on Craigslist, like really cheap. I thought it was something a little odd.
You had me
Like-
scared for a second last time we talked because I thought you were paying Rickenbacker prices.
No, because I was told it was a prop, so I thought, oh,
Okay.
it probably doesn't even work. And then, yeah, you were right. It's funny, you could tell just by looking at it. But what else?
It,
do I
it
have?
looks nice.
Well,
It's fine for what it is.
you told us last time about some of the microphones you had, and like these are, obviously Beatle relevant microphones.
Yeah, the original, I think my first comment to you guys was bringing up the U47 versus the U48 and why the U48 was different, even though it is very similar to a U47. It looks almost identical. Is the capsule design and the way that the room would have sounded through each different capsule would have been very different. And Norman Smith, who engineered everything up to Rubber Soul, would have mic'd the band a specific way with the Omni not present, because the way that the 48 was, which was a cardioid / figure 8 capsule, you can use rejection for bleed way differently than you would on a U47. So the clarity of the vocals, even though they're like standing right next to the drums, is very clear because he was using the rejection of the microphone, where the sweet spot of where it was rejecting was happening facing the drum set or the amplifiers and stuff. If you had a U47 doing that in cardioid or in Omni, it would have been way more hard to get that sound. And what I do know, and I don't know how much of that's true now, but at the time, Abbey Road was known for having a lot of U48s. Same as Capitol in LA.
So did Paul and John do figure 8 vocals back to back, like at the same time in front of each other ever?
For what I know, I think they did both. And then there's times where they sang on their own mics. Because I think because was all 3 on their own mics, even though there's stories about them being on like one microphone, I think they had their own mics. I think that was something Geoff Emerick said.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
There's also some photos, I think in around 64-ish, of John and Paul on either side of like a U48. And so obviously singing, but then they've got one U48 like this and then one upside down next to it, which is getting John's J160. And then Paul's just on the other side.
Oh, I think about You're Gonna Lose That Girl on Help. I mean, that was obviously a film set in the same room as Get Back. Did you know that?
Twickenham, yeah.
Oh yeah.
But the same soundstage, the exact same soundstage too, which is really kind of goofy if you think about it. It's like, wow, that's so wild to
Kind of
think.
weird.
Yeah, to think about that length of time period and the difference of everything, what was happening then and such. But yeah, I think honestly they would do. I mean, you've seen some other ones where, and this is going to be probably in its own episode, but like the whole Shea Stadium, they did a lot of overdubs on that footage. Did you hear about this?
Sam, I think, had a theory that it's possible they went and rented the casinos to do the overdubs or something, and then they decided to buy them.
It's confirmed they rented gear for Shea Stadium overdubs, so we don't know what they used, but it was right around the time, right before they got the casino, so it's kind of interesting. It crunches up quite a bit, so I don't know.
There's a photo of them recording in a different studio for that, and they're on U49s for vocal mics, and there's 2 or 3 set up. And it was, very not normal because it wasn't like Trident or Olympic. It was, I forgot what studio it was, but it was for that. But that also goes with the Bernard Purdy playing on drums thing, in my opinion. That's probably could be some of that. Truth from that was that, or the Hamburg record that came out that he thought he played drums on. I mean, there's so many avenues this could take today, guys.
Well, maybe.
Well, Marc, I actually there is a way I'd like to interrupt here a little bit. I always like to talk to guests by beginning at the very start, how your interest in the Beatles began. You said you were a John guy, but can you give us some detail about how you started getting into the Beatles? Maybe some favorite songs, favorite albums, and what makes you a John guy?
I love the story. So obviously, I think most people when they're early teens, you're growing up, even in their elementary days. I remember listening randomly to Beatles here and there. That was obvious, but it was never anything sticky. It was like, oh, that's cool. Or I remember looking at Magical Mystery Tour as a kid, looking on the cover, being like, what is this? But nothing clicked until 95 when the anthology came out on NBC. And I was 7th grade, got sick, went home from school. When I was that young, my parents, for some really odd reason, because you wouldn't want a sick kid in your bed. At the time, I didn't have a TV in my bedroom. My parents were like, you can stay in our room and watch TV for the day. So they had taped the anthology. I don't even think they ever watched it. They just taped it, and it was the last thing in the VCR. And I was so sick, I didn't feel like getting up and changing it. So I just hit play. And it was right up to the lead up of Hey Jude video, where they did it with what's his name?
Lindsay Hawk.
No.
David Frost?
David Frost, but he did do the video, right? That and Revolution. But you know that lead up that Paul was talking about, the Julian story? That's where it started. And then it cuts to the performance of the David Frost show. And I just remember being like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is really big. Like, the song stuck so hard to me. And then that was it. It was absolutely awful. Because at the time, I would always have little passions. Like, I was really passionate about the Kennedy assassination when I was like in third
No
grade.
way. Oh my gosh, we're best friends now.
Tons of stuff. And like finding out my uncle was on the committee in the 70s because he was a trial attorney that became a federal prosecutor that became all these other, you know, ended up becoming a U.S. attorney at the very end of everything. But he was on that, and I learned all this stuff about certain things from that. And I was a kid learning this stuff. So I always had these, like, I'd get stuck in these fascinations for a few years. This is pre-Girls, obviously.
Yes.
And a little bit pre-guitar. I liked to play guitar, but I wasn't really great until the Beatles, and then I really wanted to. And that's where it started. So that's how I got into recording right away as well, from listening to Sgt. Pepper and listening to the anthology. And I was obsessed with the anthology because of all the outtakes, the talking, the performance, the magic of all that, which I thought was equally as cool as the albums. And that folded into what's next, solo albums, obviously. And I really went on a John trip because I just got him. I don't know why. It's like you ask somebody else about George. It's the same as that. I like them all, but John was special. And I don't know if it was because he died young. I don't know, but something clicked for me really deep with that guy. And I went through the solo passion another 5 years. And even to the point where, thinking about it, in the 90s, when music was great, I just didn't care. I just was absolutely 1,000,000% Beatles, while everyone else was getting into other classic rock stuff, the modern music that was happening. I just didn't care. And still don't, to be honest, even though I work at it. I mean, the Beatles are special. It's a happy space, and I think we all, like all of us, and everyone out there that feels the same way, it's like, it's a very special thing. And I think I told you guys this the last time we talked. I would be terrified to take a gig from Paul McCartney or Ringo or something, because it would really just turn off the magic for me.
I think
I
that
don't
you
want to see them either.
Sorry to interrupt, but I remember you telling me you had some opportunity to work with Ringo or meet him, and you actually turned it down because it was just too overwhelming. Is that right?
No. Oh, God, it would be hard to turn down. There was a thing happening where I knew he was coming into the studio that I was working out of, because there was a project happening that a lot of guys would come through and visit. Elton John was there, and David Crosby, and a lot of these great named guys would come in, and Neil Young and Daryl Hannah came in one time. And you just see him walking through the hallways, and I heard Ringo was coming in, and I was terrified. So like, I didn't go in that day because I just don't want to meet. I don't want to meet the people that is like a big part of my life that was a specific time. It doesn't mean that we don't watch what Ringo's new music video that just came out the other day. I couldn't. I was like, what is
it was weird.
Doesn't mean that, but like, meeting in person is so much different. And coming from a place as a mixer producer, I've met a handful of people that I grew up really like passionate about, and it kind of just smears a little bit of the magic. And the Beatles for me is a specific thing where it's a safe space. It's always been a safe space. And if I'm sick or whatever, it's like one of those things where it's just a great magical journey to go back to. And I feel if I had the pleasure to work with Paul McCartney or Ringo, some of that would go away, and I would be terrified to lose that, if that makes sense. You could probably hear my dog is sniffing because I'm sure he's hungry. You're not getting anything to eat.
That's actually one of the drawbacks of the videos that we do too, not to turn it back on us, but I found that when I approach a song, deconstruct it, learn a part, it does take the magic away. So when I listen now to Rain, all I'm thinking about is, oh, this is when Ringo hits his left hand here and right hand here. This is when Paul does this bass lick. I don't just enjoy the song and let it waft over me. So you have a valid point.
It happens in mixing. I mean, I'm a huge... Fleetwood Mac was always my second favorite band, and I remixed their reissue for Mirage in 2016 and got all the multi-tracks from Warner and everything, and we were going through it all. And I'm listening to like Gypsy, which is one of my favorite songs of all time. And you just approach stuff differently after you experience the hyper detail of stuff. It's kind of like Abbey Road, where you go in and you're just like in this daze, but then you kind of leave and you're just like, oh man, now I did it. And that's great. And I love the magic, but there's so many avenues in my life that we treat as like extreme, wonderful aspects of our childhood or connection. I'm very, very sentimental, and I'm very, what's the other word I'm looking for?
Nostalgic?
Very to a fault. And it's important that I keep those things kind of there. It's why I have Pee Wee Herman up and all Back to the Future stuff, and microphones that relate to certain things. And I mean, I do something that's really creative and fun, but it has to be tied to something relevant, or you get burned. You just burn out and you get bored of it. So
we were interviewing Clay.
That's how I got into it.
A few weeks ago, and you know Clay very well, actually. But I asked him this question. I'm curious what you think. Speaking of kind of, very like the sanctity of the music that you love. I asked Clay what was it? What is it like mixing? Do the Beatles influence you so much that you try to put that away, or do you let it kind of consume you and inform your decisions? Like, how do you think about that with your actual work?
I mean, for Clay, which I almost talk to every day now, it's just one of my buddies. I love the guy. He's engineering a lot of stuff, so he's recording it. On top of it, he's influenced through that universe. He works out of a studio that's massively historical here in LA, that has so much history through it. And it always comes through, but you have to be cautious depending on the type of music you're working on, that you can't get away with Ringo drums on a modern thing or like a heavy rock thing either. For me, I'm primarily a mixing engineer, and so I have to adapt to the genre. And obviously, if I'm going after a Beatles sound or a sound that's vibey or 60s-esque, I would want it to sound like that. And that's where the challenge is, to try to get it to sound like that, because it is hard to get it super accurate. Because there's so many things in the chain, literally, that it could be tape that makes it sound like that. You guys know that. It's like going after that guitar tone. You found that like you're that close, but there is always going to be something that will keep you from that because of tape, or the tube preamp that they were using that's very different than the tube preamps that are being made in esque of what it was in the past. Reverbs that don't exist because they were chambers, literally. Tape delays that were part of the sound of a lot of certain aspects of the Beatles. Distortion aspects, stuff like that. But, I mean, Paul, I know you have a few Vox amplifiers. If they all sounded the same, you'd have one.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Well, no. Well, I do have a lot of repeats. But yeah, for the most part, you're right, though. Each one sounds completely different for the most part.
But they also look cool, different, too. I forgot which one. I have a Berkeley. Is that the solid state?
Yeah, I saw 210s.
Yeah, it kind of looks like the one over your left shoulder-ish.
Yeah, I got a Berkeley right here.
Oh, that's what it is. Yeah, that's what I have, yeah. I got a good deal on that, $300.
Wow. Oh, wow, yeah, that's cheap. That is a good deal.
I didn't need, my friend's like, I don't know if I need this anymore. I'm like, I'll buy it. I don't even know if I'll ever play it, but it looks so great that it inspires. That's the other thing, is just keeping stuff around that inspires you.
It's interesting to me hearing the talk of all the different elements, because I think I actually have a different feeling on how deconstructing stuff affects my appreciation of the song, because I almost feel like it has an opposite effect, where I can have that magic and have the deconstruction on top of it, and like sort of I don't know. It's almost like you get a little bit more of a fly on the wall experience while you're experiencing it. So it to me, it almost just intensifies it a little bit.
It can, but you got to be careful because it can go the opposite approach. Like kind of what Michael was saying. If you go too hard, but you learn how to just turn things off. I mean, I'll give you an idea. Like Get Back, we weren't expecting 9 hours.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And anyone in their right mind would be like, I might be able to watch that once. I've probably seen Get Back 30 times,
Same.
if not more.
100%.
Yeah, maybe that's why I've actually only watched it like once all the way through. But that's
Well, you're a
because
Hollies
Get Back...
fan. You aren't a Beatles fan.
All right. No, but that's because Get Back is like my least favorite era of the Beatles.
It is a weird, I mean, I think I was telling Sam this the other day that Rubber Soul, or no, maybe it was Clay. I'm doing a cover of this track Girl just for fun. And, you know, it's really hard getting into the deep diving of just starting to really try to nail tones and how to play like John. And the weirdest thing, and I could just hear Paul in the back of my head being like the opposite, because Paul's that counterweight between all you guys that is always like, I disagree. And then he has his...
No, me?
Yeah. And
I thought you were talking about Paul McCartney.
No, you. And that's so great because, like, I was recording the J160, John's part, and I'm listening to a couple different, like, D-mixes on YouTube, and then I made a D-mix myself that sounded almost the same, so I just kept it in the project. And there's times where you're like, that's 100% a 160. And that's what I mean, Paul, you always say, that's 100% a 160. Yeah. And then there's times where I'm like, this sounds like a classical guitar strummed. Doesn't sound like the 160, but it's like in the middle of a verse, and then it goes back to the 160 sound. Don't know how that is. I've also noticed that the drum part feels like that there's overdubs, not just one performance. It's a lot. That song is complicated. You think it's just super easy, but it's just, there's a lot of little finesse in the chords that were there that I really didn't understand. What was that one chord, Sam, that I'm like, what is that? I didn't even know.
Oh, the B7 with the capo on, yeah.
Which is apparently the chord that they went across town for.
Right. Yeah.
Which I knew about, but I forgot that was the B7 chord, which makes sense because I never played that chord in the last 25, 30 years of playing guitar.
Yeah,
I never
think
played that chord.
With Girl, I think we're pretty sure that the guitars that are doing the solo bit, or in the bridge, we're pretty sure that those go through the whole song, or some of them do, and they just got muted, but they like make it in little bleedy bits occasionally. So that song is very...
Another rhythm?
Just like the little like the
oh, right.
That guitar is doing something weird throughout the rest of the song, but it's not really there, and there's just little bits of bleed that come in occasionally.
I know, Sam, you've said that you think maybe it's not the last 12 string, but the other lead part.
The first
you think
one that
might
comes
be
in
two
might be
guitars stacked instead of 12.
I think we talked about this maybe with Perry at some point, but yeah, like we had said, it sounded more like 2 6 strings because you don't hear the octave strings on a 12. I feel like until the Rubber Soul box set comes out, hopefully at some point, like I feel like that if there's outtakes, it will reveal something that we don't know, because there's like rumors that there was like a fuzz solo recorded for it and then wiped.
Are you serious?
Yeah,
a fuzz solo on Girl.
Yeah, that sounds horrible.
I could see George doing some of that volume pedal stuff that was happening around that time. Weird, just like, what? Why?
There was a theory floating around ages ago about there being, I think it's an Irish instrument, Welsh instrument called a bazooki.
Yeah, so that was, we talked about that because did you guys on a different video pulled up the YouTube of that?
Yeah, I got really sad afterwards because I was
think
convinced it was the bazooki. I
think it was Paul again that said, I don't know, man.
Yeah, I don't think so. But it's a cool theory.
Ryan, you don't think it is. I literally was like, I think it might be. But when that came up.
Trust your ears, Mark.
Now, there's things like tape compression that makes something twice as thick. That knowing that guy that on the YouTube video just used a digital element, crappy mic with no real thickness or anything. It would be interesting, but there was way closer than I thought it was when someone mentioned it and you're pulling it up. I'm like, there's no way.
Same.
And then you hear it and you're like,
They're very similar sounds, though, a 12-string acoustic and the Bazooki, almost indistinguishable. Yeah, so who knows?
what was the one that Perry has that is going up for sale?
The Hootenanny?
The Framus, yeah.
Clay has one too, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of money. Could buy every other piece of Beatles gear you'd want.
Did that sell yet? Not yet.
Yeah,
It's sold.
The final bid was $2.25 million, and then he had to pay a buyer's premium of 27% on top of that. So the total price was like around $2.9 million.
Okay,
Jesus.
so $3 million. If Sean ever decides to sell any random Beetle guitar, the red Rickenbacker that John had. What was that?
Ringo has that.
Oh,
right?
Ringo did sell that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, he
That's
did?
been sold already.
It was
Okay.
like $600,000, I think, or something like 6-8. I don't remember.
Just
Imagine
think
if like Paul's Hofner went on sale.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. That
Well, that's.
Like $10 billion.
$15 million probably.
I think it's insured. I think it's insured for like 5-6 million.
That's
I'm sure it's
lowballing
worth
it,
more.
man.
I know.
Right. The real guy that they just found again, which you guys were saying is such a coincidence that all of this was coming out around Get Back, the 12-string found in the attic, the original Hofner that was found or stolen from the back of a van.
I think the universe is just trying to give us great episode topics.
Did you guys see that they're going to be doing a documentary on the one-to-one John Lennon concert?
Yeah.
That Sean Lennon decided to, I didn't know this, that Jack Douglas did a remix of that a while ago, and they never did anything with it. So I'm wondering if the standard team is doing the new mixes that Sean had do the other stuff.
Which concert is this?
It was the 1972 live at
Madison Square
Garden.
When he's
August,
wearing
yeah.
the army shirt and playing the Les Paul Jr., right?
Oh, wow. That deserves a remix. I felt like it was a little muddy always when I listened to
Now,
that.
it may come across as a hot take, but there were two shows that
Afternoon
I think
and night,
afternoon
yeah.
and evening. I think the evening show is better.
Well, I think Yoko used something where it was all based around the footage they didn't have. So if you listen to the album, which I grew up on, I loved that album, even though, I mean, Mother, there's no other better performance.
Yeah, he
of
kills
that.
it.
I mean,
Yeah.
Imagine's fine and all that stuff, but Woman is the End of the World is very special in the sense of the way that's like New York sound, the big sax solo and stuff like that. I was not a fan of Sometime in New York. I don't think anyone was, to be honest. Which I think is why they skipped that album and went straight to Mind Games for the reissue. Which is coming out, which is really exciting too.
Real quick, while we're on this topic, do you want to talk about who Jack Douglas is and how you have interacted with him?
I only interacted with him once, but Jack Douglas produced Double Fantasy. He's a very, very, very well-known record producer, one of the best in the world. Did all of Aerosmith and Cheap Trick and stuff like that. But I believe he was an assistant during Imagine in New York when they were doing the string overdubs. I think that's how he met John initially. But he became pals over the years and then was called upon to produce Double Fantasy when John went back. I met him once only through my friend Warren Hewitt, who is his protege pretty much. But I had a really great hang of many questions, and it was just delightful because a lot of the stories you heard were true. And that's sometimes what you want to hear, is when you hear, it's the same thing with like Geoff Emerick, where you hear a story and it is true and you're like, okay, that's great. And then sometimes you find out there's folklore and it's totally not true. And sometimes that's even cooler too. But the Jack Douglas thing, I mean, he did the stripped down Double Fantasy when it came out, what was that, 12 years ago or something. Wow. But I mean, he's still doing records and stuff. And he was really close with John that last, fall into winter. Like really pals, like pals. And I'm sure there's a lot there that not a lot of people know. I know there was a song floating around called, what was it called? Street of Dreams or something, that John wrote within a week before that he wrote about the specific area in New York that apparently there is a recording of that out there that is floating around too that is not able to be found. I'm really fascinated with that era of John Lennon stuff just because it's a very special, spooky album, obviously for reasons, but New York was a specific turning point for recording as well sonically, and that album sonically was very modern sounding for the time and really good, and still sounds incredible to me.
Well, that stripped down remix is so good too. That's my go-to mix for the whole album. Like Cleanup Time has never sounded better. I can't even listen to the original mix after the stripped down version.
Oh yeah, that's great.
That intro bass lick, yeah, it's so good.
Tony Levin, great. I got a pleasure to meet him a few times, and he's a great session bass player. He's so special, and all the stuff he did with Peter Gabriel and King Crimson and stuff like that.
You had said
a lot of great players.
You had said it was like a pet project of yours that you would love to do sometime. As a film student, that you would love to make a movie about the last 2 weeks of John's life.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so many great stories.
So much.
There's so much stuff that was happening during those last 2 weeks in his life and where he was at, and if you listen to 8 or 10 interviews he was doing during that time period from like September to December, he was so positive, which was so unlike him, that learning about him talking about planning a tour, and I don't know if you ever heard of the music video concept he had for Just Like Starting Over, which is like him flying over, being a monster, flying over Central Park, and I mean all that stuff could have really happened. The tour, the Beatles getting back together was probably a guarantee for Live Aid.
Yeah.
It was a guarantee. There was a contract that he had signed essentially saying, I have plans to work with the other 3 Beatles.
Do we think that's real though?
I don't. No, he was on the stand. He went to a court case because of some Beatles on Broadway show.
Yeah.
Beetle Mania, right? Yeah.
And
I think
he literally, this is like a week before he died. He literally said, I'm in the middle of doing something with the other guys and we have plans for the future.
It was for Ringo's album, I think, wasn't it?
Okay, yeah.
We're all going to get together for Ringo.
I had this theory that it was just an attempt to get the copyright infringement case won, that he claimed we were doing the Beatles project so the Beetle Mania couldn't continue. But we'll never know. Yeah, it's really sad.
As an aside with that, there's that clip of him walking and the guy who says hi to him through the fence. And he says, when do the Beatles get back together? He's like, oh, tomorrow.
Oh, you're full of it. You're full of it.
Yeah.
I got your Blue album. Yeah.
He was a fan of Beetle Mania, though, from what I understand.
Yeah.
He was kind of
interviews
into
about
it.
him talking about, like, being on a plane when they were watching the Bee Gees Sgt. Pepper movie, and him just being like, what alternate layer am I on, being stuck 30,000 feet above the air watching this horse of shit? It's crazy.
I know that you have like a deep obsession with the Dakota building and that whole era, and I'm often in New York, and I sent you a picture of the Dakota the other day. You actually like make floor plans, like you've gone into like the whole layout and like each room, right?
I do that because that's how I used to like find apartments from living in different cities and like securing a place on Craigslist or something. This is like 15 years ago. But like based around the photos I had, I could construct almost like a blueprint or the size of a room based around the windows and the door frames and stuff. And I've been trying to just figure out, because I've always just been very fascinated with that building. It's very special, about what rooms are in their first place, the corner apartment they own, the 72, I think, because they own the one next door too. But after collecting all the photos, I think I absolutely know what is where and what bedroom, which is really fascinating because it helps kind of understand the process of the last few years and how he was secluded, even though there was, staff and stuff that worked with them, and understanding that they had the office downstairs and Yoko's separate office downstairs, and everything was just very different. But then they had, the house in Florida, and then they had the house on Canyon Hill, which was where was that? Rhode Island, I think.
Oh, is it
So they
Paul's
had a
house?
lot of properties. What's that, right?
Is it
Near
Paul's
Paul.
house?
Yeah, it's where Paul lives. Yeah, Rhode Island.
Oh. Well, the funniest thing is that house that he owned in Palm Beach was like only a mile away from Mar-a-Lago, which is crazy to think.
No.
Oh, they would have been
Oh,
great
gosh.
friends.
Yeah, I know. Exactly.
Marc, I'm going to throw you a curveball, and it's kind of a dark topic, but because you're into this era, I'm curious. Do you think John was on drugs in his last days?
Here's my assessment. There's no question he had some sort of eating disorder, like
Right.
insecurity. And if it was macrobiotic diet or not, it was very relevant because he was extremely thin. And he wasn't, I mean, I'm 6'1", and I've been really thin my entire life. And he was really thin at the end. And he was also swimming every day. And I think he was, quote unquote, fit. But I think he was just very unhealthy in the sense he smoked a lot of cigarettes. I know he smoked a ton of weed. I don't know. I mean, I know the fact that he said he did heroin on his birthday in 1980 and he regretted it. Or the day
is that
before.
right?
And he
Oh, wow.
regretted it.
I
Because
didn't
the
know that.
Tavern on the Green birthday party that he was there, he was just talking about how awful he felt. A lot of this is, relevant to where it was. I've talked to a handful of people that worked on Double Fantasy and stuff, and they didn't see anything. But then again, I've heard from other people they did see stuff, so cocaine or whatever. I don't think it was as aggressive as it was in 1974.
The Lost Weekend.
I think, yeah.
It was a rough
exactly.
time.
But I don't know if he ever escaped it, but I don't know if that was why he was falling apart, like visually. I think he was just British that had British genes and hitting 40 and real. I mean, the guy literally did LSD 1,000 times in 1968 or something like that. I mean, it was like between 4 years, he said it was so many times I couldn't even function to process that. And that does take a toll. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. I'm like a fan, but at the same time, I'm a realist. I mean, I'm very astute to like trying to figure out what was he doing. Because I know there's a lot of PR in
Right.
talking about like everything was great. Things are wonderful. I do believe half of that was true. But of course, we only know one side.
Yeah, I've always been haunted by the stories of his shooting, and when he was on the operating table, I think they had to look at his ID to know who he was. He was so unrecognizable. He was so thin.
Well, he also had a mullet cut into his head that day.
Right, yeah, that day. Right, yeah.
I mean, it's funny because I grew up with the John Lennon collection and that picture
Right,
Anna
yeah.
Leibovitz took that day, and always being like, why did he get a haircut like that? And then I found out it was the day of, because for some reason when I was 15, I didn't think, there wasn't the internet to know that was 2 hours, 3 hours before he left. But I mean, he was very thin. He was, losing his hair probably. He was getting his haircut changed. It was an era of change consistently with fashion. A lot of that. It's funny though, when he went just during the summertime, he had the real long hair and beard, and he looked identical to himself in 1969. So, but the second he went short again, he kind of started changing. He was a chameleon. He changed more. That's why I thought he was so special, because he just changed constantly. He was just visually changing so much, which I thought was just fascinating.
I always found it like so difficult to look at him 66 to 67 even, and like, how is this the same person?
Exactly. Like, do you remember thinking about like, okay, close your eyes. What did he look like when he meets Yoko Ono? He looked like freaking Revolver.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't think of it that way. For some reason, I can't see it of him.
There's photos of him getting his haircut for How I Won the War, which is
exactly
like a nice transition. Like, it helps understand.
His hair was
the
almost
visual.
like this. Yeah. No sideboards. Yeah. And that, I think, would be what he almost looked like right before he went to film in Spain, which is fascinating to me because yeah, the difference between that and like the walrus mustache, just the way he looks in general, and the exhaustion between
And he
the two
obviously
guys. But
lost a lot of weight in '66 too.
yeah, which is, it's a lifelong thing when someone's calling you chubby or the fat beetle. I mean, it's
The
gonna
fat
stick
beetle.
with you.
Yeah, right.
And doing acid 100 times in 1 year or whatever will make you thin, I guess.
Yeah, I swear he said it was like 1,000 in 3 years or something so beyond that it was almost every other day.
It's
And,
probably
like,
65 to sometime in '68 because once he got hooked on heroin with Yoko, then he supposedly stopped taking acid.
right, which is its own mess. I mean, that whole thing of Paul saying I never wanted to do acid because you could never get back
Yeah.
home, which always stuck with me as a kid. I was like, yeah, I don't want to deal with that. Yeah, doesn't
Could
sound
I
fun.
pivot for a second? Because I don't want to miss this because it's pretty cool. You recently went to Abbey Road. I don't know how much you can say because you were working on a project, but I feel like we have a lot to talk about with your experience there.
Yeah, I mean, there was a 5-day trip. It was with Eric Burden, a couple other people. It's for a movie that I wanted to say earlier, but you guys were all like, are you sure you want to say it? I don't want to have any issues, so it'll come out. You'll see it. Billy Bob Thornton was there. Ronnie Wood was there. A couple other... Martin Freeman was there, which is really cool because Eric kept calling Morgan by accident.
Morgan Freeman.
Yeah, it was just like this guest thing that they wanted a handful of people to be a part of this end scene of this upcoming film, which once you sit, you're like, God, that's the most odd pairing ever. So it was 5 days to shoot, or 4 or 5 days to shoot at Abbey Road in Studio 2. And I was just blown away because I've been to Abbey Road, but I've never been inside 2 for as long as that was. And being around the people that you loved growing up, or like famous friends that came in to visit for a second. Eric had a couple moments where he was like, the last time I was in here was when they were doing the White Album. And I remember the setup. John was over here and Yoko was coming out of the downstairs. Like he was just revisiting, and you just don't believe any of that's true. Because it goes back to the folklore of like, I'm in this room. I know more than most people, to be honest. Like,
does Eric
every
have a
corner.
good memory like that, though, generally?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, he's 83. I've known him for a long time, and him and his wife are just amazing people. And Eric is just so good at just telling stories, which is crazy because, I didn't know this until meeting Eric, that he was the Eggman. John named him the Eggman and stuff like that. They were pals up until 67, 68. They were like almost inseparable for like good 2 winters straight.
Well, John was a big fan of the Animals as opposed to a lot of the other Mersey Beat era groups.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was really cool going in there. It was cool driving through London, coming from the airport, because they came from Greece and I came from here, and we met up at London and we were driving through, and he pointed at the building or the area over there is the building that Jimmy died in, because he was really close with Hendrix too, like best friends with him, and was here or was in London when it happened, when he passed away and stuff. It's just stories like that you just don't believe. And being in Abbey Road, like I said, like I was talking to staff, guys that have worked at Abbey Road for Alex, a pal of mine who masters there, who mastered the new Mind Games thing. We're walking around, he's showing me like the secret tours and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, no, let's go over here because this is what. He's like, how do you know that? And I'm like, I don't know. It's just fascination. It's the detail stuff that we all know. Some of the even staff that works there had no idea of certain things. It's just really cool. But yeah, we got to go through around filming and stuff. I got to go in and kind of explore the studios. Studio 1 is very big, as most people would know. Studio 3, I only poked my head in for a second. It's the only room that really doesn't look the same, obviously. And I think that's changed quite a bit. But I am fascinated with that room because now finding out all the stuff that was done in there. Because it is a smaller studio compared to 2 and 1.
Yeah, what exactly was done to it, just in a summary, I guess? I don't actually know.
Well, in the 80s, they redid the whole room and put like mirrors everywhere. It was very different. And then I think they kind of restored it back to a kind of traditional looking studio, but it's still very different. Studio 3 used to just look like a box. I mean, you see any of the photos that the guys are in, they're just a box with that paneling, long stretch paneling that's everywhere.
Is
but
the
it's funny
ceiling
because
as high in that room as it is in Studio 2?
Oh, not even close.
Okay, I didn't think so.
It's high. It's very high, but it's like Studio 2 ceiling is like 60 feet. I mean, it's crazy how big it is.
Studio 3 is the Hey Bulldog sessions. You see, it's tall, but it's like,
Yeah.
feels like a room.
I mean, it's weird because the control room used to be on the other side of where it's at now. They've changed the control room. There's all sorts of neat things in that building. You know, there's all these smaller mixing rooms. You know, one of the main offshoot tiny little office rooms was the room that Phil Spector did the entire Let It Be stuff in. Tiny little room. The green room, that's off of 2's control room tape room, because I believe compared to what it was in the 60s, the control room is blown out to be twice as big now. But we all know the story about the Year Blues session being in the small room next to the tape room. That's the green room now. And I had a pleasure of saying while Ronnie Wood and Duff from Guns N' Roses, and I know it sounds like I'm name dropping, but everyone was dropping their stuff off in there. And I was in there, I said, do you guys know this is the room that they recorded Year Blues in? And they're like, no. And they didn't care. They never cared. But I'm just like, this is the room. This is the room. This is so cool.
I have a question for Marc about that. Why? So for Sgt. Pepper, I thought it was always an interesting choice that they went to Studio 2 for so much of the backing, because it's a big room. I mean, was it just experimentation? I felt like Revolver is Studio 3 in a lot of ways, that more tight sound. Do you have any idea why they might have chose Studio 2?
That would be a Brian Kehoe question. Or Clay. I would say I think it's probably scheduling. I mean, I'm sure that Norman Smith and George Martin had preferences. I don't think the band cared, ever. They just were told to go wherever they were told to go. I'm assuming. But then again, like, some of my favorite sounding Beatle tracks are done in 3. For sure. Like Plastic Ono Band was... A lot of it was Studio 3, which is crazy.
Instant Karma was too, wasn't it?
I think Instant Karma was 2.
Was it?
Only because Klaus Vormann, I thought, said he remembers Paul or Phil Spector walking down the stairs to them.
2 head stairs.
But I might be wrong because I know they did a lot, and there's footage of them doing Plastic Ono Band.
Yeah.
There's that photo of John. Have you ever seen of him standing in front of the chair with the sign saying "Do not touch"?
Yeah.
That's Studio 2. So that looked. That's like the, you know, the after he had the buzz and stuff was growing out. So that
he's
could
like
have
wearing
been
overalls, isn't he?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, that's
Instant Karma.
Yeah.
Looks like January 27th, 1970 in Studio 3.
Studio 3.
And that's according to the tape box.
Wow. There's a photo of him with the J200. That was
that was
right.
Yeah.
So here's something else. Obviously, you know about the TG console being solid state, and pre that it was very, very 2B sounding console. I don't know what console was in Studio 3 in 1970. Could have been the original Red. That would be something either Clay or Brian Kehoe would know more
Do
deep
you
about.
want to see a cool video if I can find it real quick?
Yeah. That's this channel. It's all about
This
that
might
stuff.
this might take me a second, but
So help me if it's anything Hollies.
Is it Helen Shapiro?
so we can skip around. This is basically a video about the Mersey Beat stuff, and they show clips of these are basically all, well, I guess, that was the Escorts actually, I think. But they have
That's the original. That's the original Cavern.
yeah.
Which is crazy because that's probably the highest resolution film you'll ever see of the real.
But that's not the main reason I pulled this up. So this has this group, Swingin' Blue Jeans, who's known for "You're No Good," which Linda Ronstadt later did. But anyways, this is a Ready Steady Go episode or something. But there's this video later on, right here. Watch this. And this song...
That's 3. See? There's the panel.
Whoa.
Go back.
Oh.
I called it. See the panel?
Mm-hmm.
No kidding.
And this song was first appeared on the charts in March of '64. So this is probably like February or something.
Give you an idea of the layout. Hit pause for a second.
Yeah. Oops.
Okay. The guy in the pink shirt.
Mm-hmm.
If you would go straight through him, straight through that wall, and about 150 yards, you'd be right over the Abbey Road crossing.
Really?
So that's that giving you the idea. So the control room used to be there, and now it's on the other side.
Huh.
But it's just fascinating seeing all the 47s on the amps. And
Is it possible those AC30s were Beetle amps, or probably not?
You could try to match... I mean, probably not, because this band probably also had AC30s, but you could try to match those little tear marks.
The
on
wear,
on the
yeah.
cloth, yeah.
it's very interesting because Studio 3 was blue like Studio 1. And Studio 1 was just that awful white brick. And that's another reason why I didn't think that was 2 in that photo.
Ryan, can you
John.
pull up the Helen Shapiro
That's
one?
Studio
That
1.
was 61, right? Okay. I think
And
it's
there's
so
also
interesting.
stuff, there's some Studio
Let
1.
me finish
is that
playing
Norman
this.
Smith right there? Yeah.
And also, you can see the desk in use, which is pretty cool.
So that's the red that Lenny Kravitz bought.
I think this is an incredible video to see how you get an idea of how loud their amps are because of how close they are to stuff.
So that's Storm and Norman right there. It's just a bunch of guys just wanting to be the Beatles,
And failing.
and they just look like impersonators.
They look like nerds.
I have seen this because I remember that guy, the producer dude, doing the timing thing with his hand.
Talk back.
But I think it was pulled from something else.
Lenny
Is that Richard
Kravitz bought
Jenkins?
that
Oh.
desk.
Yeah, and then they sold it.
Oh.
So there's an Altec compressor and a Fairchild 660 to his right.
That's cool.
So much money.
But yeah, that's...
That is fascinating stuff.
Yeah. I was just
I'm
this
just-
is fantastic. There's like early color footage of this stuff. Like there's no color footage of the Beatles in there for a while. Until
Yeah.
maybe Hey Bulldog.
Wow.
Even so, Hey Bulldog, but like that little bit of footage from that day of Hey Jude as well in Studio 2.
While we're here, I might
which-
as well pull this up.
Oh shit!
This is where we all leave.
Now
Because this is
All right, guys. Bye.
Good
Have a
episode.
great night.
Subscribe, like
this is
the
3
channel.
years
in my
later in the same
video.
room.
You had to go for it, Ryan.
There's Eric Burden right there.
He's gonna care about it.
Oh yeah.
This is 3 years later, same room.
I like that Texan though. Like I'll give you that. I like that Texan.
But I love that you can
Looks like
see
a Berkeley amp.
video
or
from the
some
control
sort.
room.
So this was 3.
Yeah, this is Studio 3. And supposedly, the Penny Lane solo was being recorded while this video was being recorded. Like in
Really?
the next room over.
Well, the way it is, so if you leave Studio 3's live room, you walk into the hallway and you can almost go right across the hall is the stairs, and then to the left, you walk a little bit further down and that first door is the control room to 2. So you see how tall the ceiling is in there? It's still tall. It's just not...
And there's
Not
those
cavernous.
big curtain things.
So that video of A Day in the Life when they're doing the orchestra
That's
stuff.
all
and they
Studio
have that-
2.
Okay,
No, that's
an-
one.
Oh, okay.
Is that 1 or 2?
Okay, that
Oh.
makes sense. That's 1.
That's color footage too, though.
That's all like their home video camera stuff,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
I think that's 1. They did pretty much everything.
Yeah, that makes sense. I
Well,
guess.
hold on.
It's definitely not 3.
I never.
I know
really
the
thought
trumpets.
about
The
this.
trumpets
Yeah.
for Sgt. Pepper were done in 2. Because there's photos of Paul like sort of pseudo conducting them or whatever.
I mean, I would say I thought. I mean, obviously, All You Need Is Love is 1. All you have to do is spot the staircase, and you'll know in a second. Obviously, but that looks like 1.
Yeah,
that
looks
like
too
2.
big to be 2.
I mean, 2 is huge, but they have those panels that roll through the whole room, the big white things that you see right there. So that I'm like, I don't know if they had those in Studio One.
Well, I can show you a
corners.
Studio One clip because I'm pretty sure that Helen Shapiro thing.
That's really good. That's probably like the earliest.
That's like
color
61,
footage of
yeah.
Abbey Road.
And it's all blue, right?
Where is it?
Look who it
What
is.
song was
I
it?
think it's Walking Back to Happiness.
Yeah.
Good song.
That was her massive hit, wasn't it?
She was like 13 when she recorded that.
Who was the redhead girl?
Cilla
that
Black.
Yeah, so they did Alfie in Studio One as well.
Really?
There's footage of that online as well.
We'll try this.
Color footage of her recording live with Burt Bacharach and George Martin and stuff.
That poor duck.
I mean, we know that like Sgt. Pepper Reprise was recorded in Studio One. There was a handful of stuff that they did stuff in 1, at least I think. Oh, look at that. There's that producer guy again.
Oh yeah.
What a joker.
He's everywhere.
Oh, this might not be actually.
Could be
That's
2.
2.
There's like a
That's
blue
2.
tint over everything.
It's so blue, yeah.
That's 2 because they're standing in from the.
Yeah.
Yep, that's 2. Fascinating.
And this is 61, I think.
Wow.
Marc, I got a
So he's
producing
facing
question
to the
for you, Marc.
right. That would be the window, and that's the corner.
That corner is usually where Ringo's drums would go, right?
Hold
Yeah.
on. Paul just asked something.
What's up, Paul?
Well, I just wanted to talk, since we're on the topic of the studio, you guys were talking earlier about the height of the studio, like the ceiling and all that stuff. But what I've realized, though, if you look at the microphones on the placement of how they have them on the amps, well, Ryan, I'll let you keep playing this then if you want to keep playing this.
Oh, I mean, I was just going to let
No,
you keep
talking.
No, keep going, because I had to keep going.
Well, I think you could ask it, and we could
Yeah,
just
ask it
watch
while
the
we're all
footage.
watching.
Oh, because I got to use my hands. You know, like I had a question about like how the microphone placement was. Don't worry about it.
Show
Just keep
Paul.
going
I
with
want
this.
to see Paul's hands.
Paul, show us
Don't
your
worry about
hands.
it. no,
Start-
keep going.
start
with the
swinging.
show.
No, people can
It's-
see it. People can
It's
see
something
that
just
stuff.
related to this, just to keep the show moving along. Because I know we're just focusing on the interior of studios right now.
You're thinking about the
anyway,
placement of the mics, why they would be so far.
Well, no. Here's my question. You have this big building. You have a microphone, and all their microphones, no matter what band we're looking at and all the positions, they're relatively close up to the amp. Sound's projecting and it's hitting the microphone first. That sound wave that then has to travel past that microphone, bounce off that high ceiling, return back to the back of the microphone. How much is that really making a difference in the sound? Because again, I'm blasting the guitar. As soon as I hit that first strum, that sound is projecting right to the microphone first. So the sound is capturing that direct sound. It's not capturing the sound of that echo off the back of the wall, is it?
Well, I mean, think about She's a Woman. Gung, gung. You hear so much of that room on that between.
Oh yeah, no, I
space.
know the room. Some room has a lot, but it's just seeing the mic placement though of a lot of what we're seeing. I wouldn't feel as though a lot of the room has a lot to do with the sound.
It's
I mean, if it
way
was more like
than you think it is. That's why
Yeah, I
I've
know.
always been very, like, beside myself when I found out some of the stuff is in 2 versus 1, or 2 versus 3, because you can definitely hear the size of 1 in like
and the difference.
the
when you
Sgt.
play-
Pepper reissue of when they were doing the reprise. You could just hear the insane when they're playing the guitar. It's just like cavernous.
That
Which is
drum
why
sound
everyone-
is so huge too. I've always loved that drum sound.
Right.
And the
But I would
compressors
say,
also condense the sound, and they
Like,
condenser mics will get more of the echo, right?
Drums I can kind of understand because you're having a big box effect to it. But like an electrified amplifier, like the AC30, the AC100, like I feel fine. we see them in the studio, and I mean, them microphones are right there.
Well, I'll give you an
I just
idea.
don't feel like
Like a 48 on the amp was probably in cardioid mode, which means it's not really picking anything up from the back. Period. It's known for having that rejection in the back. But knowing that Geoff Emerick would record like the bass with a C12 for Sgt. Pepper and put that in the room and put it in Omni or Figure 8, I can't remember which one, but that was allowing both sides of the capsule to use.
Yeah.
So the weird thing is, you're right.
So yeah, so there is a possibility that the room would have nothing to do with a guitar amp. Like I feel fine when they were doing the recording that day.
Well, I would say
you gotta
not
think
on
of it
that
as-
mic, but there are like 6 mics active at the same time. So
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
It's, you think of it
further
as,
distance.
there's
Think of it
like
like
the
on the
vocal
White
mic
Album.
is going to pick it up, right?
when you hear like the White Album, I hear the most bleed out of any Beatles stuff is probably in the White Album. At least I can hear, where they're all in 2, most likely, and you can hear guitar amps bleeding into the drum mics, which is causing that ambience on the guitar. But depending on how it's panned, that's the special magic, where you have the guitar amp on the left that's dry, and then you get the ambience from the drums on the right. And it does this like spiral thing that every time there's a stab, that's where the glue is, and that's what people really go after when they're trying to get larger studio ambiences. In movie making and like orchestral stuff, to have that sounding ambience around instruments and how bleed works together is actually part of the magic of recording as well.
So I was just going to say there's a good chance that the Beatles, or most bands back then, especially back then, would have preferred to not record individual parts. Say if they had 8 tracks to deal with, just laying down one guitar solo on that one track might not have been good because you would have lost the bleed.
I mean, now there's a lot of people for, like, if I'm doing, let's just say, an orchestra that's playing live, but there's a solo part in the orchestra, and the solo part messed up, and we have to overdub the solo part again, I record all of the mics to make sure that the bleed is covered. Doesn't mean that I'm using it, but I don't know what their preference would be. It's the same thing as, I think,
I gotcha.
George Martin has even said it about technology, where like there's no question they would have used it if there was an option to be there, because they were.
So you're saying
to
too, say if nobody was singing or anything like that, they would have put possibly their vocal microphones on, and then George just lay down a solo of something so that at least
not then. No, I don't
vocal-
think that. No, I
Oh,
think
okay.
for me, in my field of doing what you do, you kind of you protect yourself and you get as much in case, because if there was a solo in the room, let's say it's a harp in the same room as the orchestra, and you overdid the harp only with the spot mic, but you're only punching in the first 3 phrases, you can hear it. And you can hear that a lot. I'll give you a little fun little inside trick about Fleetwood Mac Dreams. When Ken Kelly recorded at Sausalito Record Plant, the band, Fleetwood Mac, they had Stevie doing scratch vocals on an RE20. Just kind of standing in front of the band, going through songs. When they recorded Dreams, which is one of the most famous sounding snare drums in history, she was recording her voice, and then they were going to go and redo the vocals later. They could never get her take as good as that scratch vocal. And the other thing was, you heard drums in her vocal mic. So there's a part in Dreams at the end of the chorus into the 3rd verse or the 4th verse. They do a punch-in on her voice to fix some stuff. And the snare and the drums change drastically because there's no drum coming through the vocal mic of the bleed from 10 feet in front
It's
of the
like
drum
having
set.
a room mic on the drums, right?
Exactly. And by not having that, the drums changed. But luckily, it was just so quick, it was in and out. I just think at that time, everyone tracked everything live because of convenience. And I don't even remember when they went from... what was it, 3-track to 4-track, or
2-track to
4-track?
4-track happens on I Want to Hold Your Hand, so like around November '63.
Oh, 3-track was the live stuff at Capitol or at Hollywood Bowl, where they put like the wrong thing in the center when you're supposed to be putting vocal in the center and other stuff on the other. They just like totally, whoever did it totally didn't take it that approach. I do think that at the time it was just more about capturing the band, the performance. 4 tracks was a luxury, obviously, then, and then they wanted 8, and then it went to 16, then it went to 24, and then they started syncing 2 24s together, and now we're at a place where you don't even question it.
You can
But the
record
limitation-
anything now. You have
Yeah.
so much space.
The limitation created magic because you had to plan stuff out and get stuff right. It's the same as like singing without having 1,000 takes. You guys remember recording? I don't know if Dom, if you do, because you are younger. I don't think you had a 4-track cassette recorder growing up, did you?
No.
What's a cassette?
Yeah,
So-
I don't know what that is.
Do you remember recording on a 4-track cassette, any of you guys, your voice? And you didn't have like ways to punch in and out to get everything perfect. It's just you handled it different and you approached stuff way different.
Well, you have to go in with the mentality of I have to get it perfect because you've got limited space here.
But you listen to or Strawberry Fields, which is one of my favorite John Lennon songs by far. It still sounds so fresh sonically. And I had no idea how they were able to do all the reverse cymbals and plan that all out knowing that it was all going to come together. And I know that there's a lot of coincidence happening in the world, but like being able to do 2 separate takes that are totally different keys and different tempos.
And they match
then-
perfectly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Genius.
it's
Incredible.
fascinating.
Nothing short of it.
Guys,
Nothing
we have to
short
do
of
a deep
genius.
dive on Strawberry Fields. That's in our destiny.
Well, yeah, we just
Oh,
need to
boy.
spend 6 months
Mark,
to prepare for the
I got more
episode.
questions for you.
Yeah, Paul.
So, if you right now, for our viewers that were trying to get into recreating Beatle music, and they had an amplifier, an AC30 or whatever it might be, what microphone would you 2 microphones I want you to recommend to them? First, a good cheap one that does the trick, and then next, a really good one that doesn't break the bank, but something that's maybe next level from like what I'm using all the time, which is my WA47, AW47.
Well, I think Warm Audio just came out with the D19.
Mm-hmm. $200.
And
So D9, you recommend that as one of the high ones?
Well, I think that mic was used so much to record acoustic guitar, drums, and a lot of elements that it's pretty special in the sense a dynamic mic has a little more pleasing sound than lower level condenser mics, lower expensive condenser mics. Even a Warm 47 is pretty great. Those are great, but you're also dealing with a large diaphragm condenser. Picking up stuff in an untreated room could be really messy, boomy, and the
So that's
D19
Oh, you said D19. The Warm Audio D19?
that
Yeah.
just came out, and I think those are like
It's only
cheaper than
$200.
the
Yeah.
57, right?
That says WA19.
But that's
Yeah, it's
definitely
mimicking a D19.
They couldn't call it the D19. Yeah.
So that's a good mic that you'd say then on the cheap, kind of more of the budget side to do the trick.
57 is a phenomenal sounding microphone. And there's plenty of footage of John Lennon singing into 57s in the 70s for keeper vocals. So, I mean, I think the world needs to get out of the headspace of being like, we got to use condensers or we got to do whatever. Of course, in digital recording, because it's so clear and fine detailed that it's picking up a lot of flaws. I mean, sure, Michael, you've encountered this recording drums, that just because you're using a little more expensive microphone, like Sam, I can't tell if that's a 414 or what, but it's really sensitive microphone, and it might be too sensitive for the instrument you're going for, or it might not sound anything like what you're going after. I feel like that new D19 will get that compared to a 160, or compared to, playing with the 160 combining, you're going to get a really good, unique kind of that real nice sound. I mean, I have a 53 U47 and I recorded with my Gibson 160 for that girl track, and it didn't sound anything, at least for me to think, like what I was hoping it was going to sound like. It sounded close. It certainly was. But we're talking the last 5%, which I'm sure all you guys are really in tune to getting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard, even with the stuff that is identical, because there's all sorts of stuff. As you know, Paul played bass so different than everyone else, and John played guitar so odd, and his banjo chords and everything that went with it. And the choice of strings, which I'm finding is just as equally as important. I mean, I saw one of Perry's video of him playing I Feel Fine, and I didn't know those were flat wound strings. No, that was Day Tripper. Those were flat wound strings on Day Tripper, the lead guitar. And I know
he used them. I can't remember if we had. I don't know if I ever made it like a decision on that. I don't know.
But
if
he
you
was
guys did.
saying that this is maybe why he was able to get more pluck, and he showed with and without. Maybe they didn't use that, but it was closer to the sound on the record. Yeah, I mean, we can get lost getting into that stuff, but you're looking for vibe. I think, you always, like, even the SM7s that you guys all seem to have are terrific sounding mics on guitar, drums. They're very, thinking about this when you're recording drum sets in an untreated room, condensers can be really kind of harsh on the cymbals and stuff. And dynamics and ribbon mics, and there's a lot of inexpensive ribbon mics too, just handle that stuff a lot better. But it's interesting to think, because I know Norman Smith would use like a Coles, which was the BBC STC version, and a D20 or a bigger football than that. And then something changed where he started putting D19s on everything.
So
Tops and
interesting,
bottoms.
because dynamic mics aren't usually associated with like overhead or acoustic guitar, but something with those mics especially, right?
But
With
think
the
about the
D19.
fidelity in Sgt. Pepper drums versus the fidelity of Let It Be drums. Those are U67s, which are unbelievably expensive, beautiful tube microphones on overheads that Glenn Johns was using for Let It Be. And that drum sound is so different sounding than drum sounds from Sgt. Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour into pre-India stuff. And then everything kind of changed when they came back, and then Ken Scott came in, who had his own style of mixing that was a little different.
I don't think you mean Ken Scott. I think you mean the guy who did Pink Floyd, right?
Alan Parsons?
No, the Dark Side of the Moon.
Chris Thomas.
Chris Thomas. Is that who you mean?
Well, Ken Scott came in after Geoff Emerick left as engineer.
Because Ken Scott was on
As
some of the
engineer.
early sessions too, right?
I think he did Mother Should Know, maybe subbing during... I think he was subbing here and there.
Okay,
which is
maybe
why
that's
he
what I'm
became
remembering.
replacing. I do know that the big blow up was Revolution. That was the day that Geoff left. I'm done. And he came back for another 4 hours in that.
Oh, yeah,
talk
that-
about,
that was a funny story.
Oh, sorry, Dom. I
That-
wanted
that's
to
a-
hear.
That's a funny story, where Geoff Emerick blew up at John.
I wanted to hear more about, because Mark actually met Geoff Emerick, so I'm curious, like, what was your experience? I think it was just one day, right? Kind of like Jack Douglas.
I've met Geoff 3 different times. I spent a really special night with him and a handful of other kind of guys that were equally passionate about stuff, and randomly got to mix his last project he was producing when he passed away. That was kind of a weird coincidence thing that just closed a big check in my life of going, wow, what an honor to be able to do that. But Beatle related, where it wasn't just at like an event or something where you just talk for 5 minutes. This was like a 4-hour hang with like 8 guys. And the whole point was to just talk about anything you wanted to know. And I was going into like, give my regards to Broad Street and all sorts of random tracking days from the 80s and some anthology chat, lots of Beatles chat. I think I brought this up about the DI and Day in the Life on the anthology, and he's just like, there was never a DI. And I'm like, listen to the recording. I'm not crazy. If you listen to the anthology, you know that obviously they're cutting heads of some of the songs, and then they're putting in the take after that wasn't connected. That first thing in anthology of Day in the Life, take 1, when he's strumming before he says Sugar Plum Fairy, there's no question that sounds like a DI 160. Am I crazy? Everyone I bring it up to says absolutely. And he's like, I never did that. And
Well,
I'm
we
thinking,
definitely
"Oh,
know
I
they
don't
did
know."
it because obviously the Lovely Rita thing.
Right. And all the stuff when they were just playing acoustic electric guitars for I Feel Fine and all the other stuff. So, I mean, there's just so many questions that I had and all these answers. A lot of it was stuff being fascinated and reading all the articles and interviews he ever gave. He usually told a lot of the same stories. I mean, I bought his book right when it came out. And some of the stuff I learned that was separate were pretty cool. You know, it's interesting to know that all these engineers had different relationships with each Beatle. Like Geoff was really close with Paul.
He was not a big fan of George, right?
George was really close with Ken Scott. And, you know, Phil, what was Phil's last name? McDonald, yeah. Who did some of Abbey Road and did Imagine, and some of Plastic Ono Band was close with John. And it's just interesting to see.
Do you want to talk some about, you had told us about Geoff Emerick and the anthology project with the Reverb Room. Do you want to, is this a good time to talk about that?
Yeah, that was one thing I did ask him that I remember reading somewhere in some rag thing in the 90s that, and this was confirmed from him, so there might be people that are like, I don't know, but this is what he told me. And so the echo chamber in Studio 2, which was the reverb of choice for that, I don't think Geoff Emerick really liked plate reverbs and stuff.
And real quick, this is, when you talk about a reverb chamber, an echo chamber, this is mainly for vocals, I think, where you take the finished track and you just like re-record it while playing it in this reverb chamber. Is that right?
Right. They wanted, back in the 60s and 50s and stuff, all the studios had their own custom echo reverb rooms. Some of them were in bathrooms that just put speakers and microphones and just reamped. And some had, you know, specific rooms designed. Capitol has one of the most historic echo chambers in history. And they're just really shiny lacquered wall rooms that look like prison cells. They don't look very special. They sometimes have big pillars in there with speakers and microphones that they're sending a vocal in to get the ambience of the room and then blending the ambience with the track. With the Beatles, you heard a lot of it in the beginning. Like a lot of the stuff, all the bootlegs that we all had growing up, when they were talking, you hear the reverb on the voice. That was the chamber at the time. I think they, in the 70s, discontinued the chamber, or the 80s discontinued the chamber at Studio 2. And where the chamber is if you go down the stairs, close your eyes, go down the stairs, Studio 2, and you're walking straight to that back door, which is below the clock. You open the door and you go to your right, and that is the echo chamber room, which is, you know, it's not huge. It's kind of like almost like the size of a bigger bedroom or something. And it's all lacquered walls, and it had cement pillars in it. But at the time, I think they closed it up and they changed everything because the 80s, everything started becoming digital and smaller. Components were smaller. By the time the 90s happened, the way that I know that they were going to redo the anthology was Geoff was going to be remixing on an era-dependent recording console. So it was a TG console with reverbs and delays of the unique era. So he wouldn't be using digital reverb on the anthology, which was such a smart move because at that time in the 90s, I mean, you heard that some of the Paul albums at that era, it's so dated sounding with all that kind of digital era reverbs and stuff. So they didn't have, and he didn't like plates. He said he just wasn't he didn't hate them after, but he just didn't like them in that era. So he didn't want to use plates because they were very specific sounding. Plate reverbs, which is a steel plate, doing the same thing, reverberating and vibrating. So they apparently rebuilt the chamber, and they re-lacquered the wall, and they used that chamber as ambience on a lot of the anthology. And you can really hear it throughout the entire 3-disc process. Now, obviously, the first 80% of the first anthology one is kind of old stuff. But once it got into studio stuff, you can really hear it in studio or disc 2. But where you can know what the reverb sounds like is if you pull up. Let me think about what track. So Studio or Anthology 3 opens up with the Escher demos, right? Of John singing Happiness is a Warm Gun. That's track 2 of Anthology 3, disc 1. Listen to that track and then go and listen to the same track, the Escher demo of that song on the reissue of White Album. 2 different mixes of the same demo. This was done on a demo. Geoff used the ambience of the new chamber to create ambience of that demo. And it's very different sounding. You can also hear it in like, not I Feel Fine, but I'm Down. You can really hear it in I'm Down because he stops and you can hear the ambience of the room and it's just this real lush, smaller ambience. So that's the chamber. It's still there. I got to go in it. I'll send a picture. Maybe you can include it here. But they store a lot of like music stands and stuff in it. It's kind of sad.
Was that also done on Come and Get It? I think the mix on the Abbey Road reissue is very dry, but the Anthology mix is great, warm, and has that reverb. Do you know if that was done on that track too?
I think so. I mean, it probably was. Did Geoff Emerick record that demo of Paul's?
I don't know. Good question.
Or that could have been a Phil McDonald thing because I think that was during Abbey Road when Geoff wasn't coming back yet. I might be wrong, but there's definitely, but that means Geoff Emerick mixed it for Anthology though, which sounds very different. You're right.
It sounds fantastic. Yeah.
I love though. I don't think we need a new reissue mixes of Anthology. I don't think the de-noising thing is needed for that. I think everything sounded terrific sonically. In fact, way better than a lot of stuff that's been done. Fascinated how well stuff sounds. And my favorite drum era, like if you listen to like You Know My Name, that drum sound is so good.
The snare sound
and
especially. Yeah.
Exactly. That was like same as like, you know, the Magical Mystery Tour sessions were the same era where the drums have this like bright ambience. And then it just stopped after that. So you wonder what they were doing there.
I really love that on the rooftop, the tea towel actually slips off of Ringo's snare for the first take of Get Back, and you get that big snare sound again just for one brief shining moment. Then it goes back to the tea towels. Yeah, you have to really listen for it, but it sounds sparkling. It sounds amazing.
You know, something that my friend Ryan was tracking this drum stuff for Girl, and he was trying to understand the brushes aspect of that track. And Ringo does... He somehow finds a way to get rim shots on a brush.
It's possible.
Which
it's possible.
I know, but like the fact that it's so inconsistent too, because, and you know this, like his swooshing effect and everything. There, like I said earlier, there is a lot more to that track drum wise than I think anything's being discussed because, you know, obviously the grab on the thing and the hiccup kick drum on that part and the brushes, and then there's definitely a rivet on the cymbals on that too. You can hear it just barely tinkering.
Did anybody in the group do that song yet?
Not yet. No.
Michael or Sam? No.
Marc will be the first.
Clay's playing bass. He was asking. He was pretty confident it was a Rickenbacker.
It had to have been. That entire album, I think, is a Rick.
Well, there's a few early ones. I mean, well, Wait, obviously.
Wait, I think, was the Hofner for sure. That was recorded
Run
for Help.
for Your
wasn't it?
Life and Norwegian Wood, I think, were two of the earliest ones. And Norwegian Wood does have a little bit of a woodier tone on the bass.
You know what's crazy? That for like Paul always trying to get new sounds, he never played like an acoustic bass, really, ever, on any
He
Beatles
owns
track.
Bill Black's bass.
Right.
I guess Real Love technically because he does play the Bill Black bass.
Right.
Yeah, that was a
right. But that also has like a 8-string bass on it too.
That's a weird
the Jeff
track.
Lynne era.
The Wall.
He was,
Yeah. The 5-string.
That is the one track that I would love to hear remixed at some point. Maybe John's
Real
voice
Love?
could be spruced up.
I don't
they're
know.
gonna get to that.
I'm torn on it, honestly.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's gonna sound so stupid, but it's like John's like singing from beyond
From
the
the grave.
Yeah, right.
It's a good
Right.
point. It is interesting too. There was a mix released in 2015 when the One album was remastered. That's entirely
it's bad.
different than the anthology.
bad.
mix.
Yeah. Guitars are different.
Yeah.
The words, he auto-tuned the voice.
The intro's completely different. Yeah.
I caught that and I was like, what on earth? And so I would go back, like we all do, and listen to whatever was on YouTube 15 years ago to find the difference between the two, because I don't have a CD player anymore, so I couldn't crack open my discs. But just the sound, they were trying to like Jeff Lynne, the drums and stuff. It lost so much of the sound. Right. The whole way that thing put together was, it sounds smaller. The original sounds smaller than the new one, but the new one does not work.
No, it doesn't. That's all about the drums. Do you remember the fan-made version Now and Then from the late 2000s? It sounds exactly the same.
Right.
I like that one more than the Beatles version.
Well, I'd like to know, I know we've talked about this, but I'd like to know what was done and kept, and then they just left off. They had to have had Ringo.
Oh, we've talked
recorded,
about this before,
because
I
you
think.
see it on the music video. He's playing.
So
the
what
exact
happened
Now and Then
was
part.
what happened was they were actually going to be using a drum machine.
Right.
And I think Ringo sampled drums for that.
Well, it was the guy that was working on the digital tracks.
Yeah.
In LA that we all read the same article.
That was a great article, too.
We're all experts on the same article.
There's also some stuff in the Now and Then video that's a bit misleading, because you see like Ringo laying down a hi-hat track and Ringo playing along, but that's Real Love. They're the same tempo. He's wearing the same clothes as in the Real Love.
But they
music
recorded a lot of the drums in the kitchen as well. It wasn't even recorded in the corner, which is weirdly weird because, they were using those flash rods. What are those called? Hot rods.
The what?
It's not a brush. It's the plastic.
Bundle.
Yeah, the plastic brushes almost.
Do you mean on Now and Then when he's doing?
I don't know
in
if
the
Now and
background?
Then, but definitely Real Love and the snare, Virgin snare hits.
Real Love was weird.
Well, I think the article that we were just talking about, Real Love, was recorded with separate drums, like snare and then separate hi-hat, separate kick drum. I think Ringo did it all weird like that.
That is weird.
Could it have been because it was fluctuating? But that's weird. That doesn't make sense because when I did Girl, I tempo mapped the original version because I thought to create a click track. Instead of just going, oh, this song's in 109 BPMs, I'm playing that like you would normally put a click track in. I thought, well, it's the Beatles, so they're definitely speeding up and slowing down. That's part of the magic.
Yep.
So I just want to make sure I get that. So I tempo mapped. My friend Ryan and I got the tempo mapping of the exact version, and then I got the way that it fluttered, slowed down, and I played to the click just fine, pushing and pulling. I'm wondering it's just because I think Jeff Lynne was being commissioned to do those tracks and basically was covering his ass and putting as much stuff as he could when he came to go over to England to work. And it just sounded like Paul was game on and George was like, it's an interesting thing because Jeff Lynne came through George, but I can almost guarantee you it was Jeff Lynne that convinced George to continue doing the Beatles tracks.
I think George just wanted the paycheck.
Probably.
Wanted to pay off Friar Park.
You want to pay off that Ferrari. Remember that one
McLaren,
scene in the anthology?
yeah, right.
They pulled up in that like center seat.
Nice motor. Nice motor. Yeah.
Wow.
It's good stuff.
I'm so fascinated with the anthology. It's going to be very interesting to see if that's what Peter Jackson is tinkering with next.
20th anniversary anthology.
30th.
Oh, yeah.
It'll be 30 for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Whoops.
What
You're
did you
10
think
years
of,
behind, right?
Yeah.
Now and Then, because we had a big guest, sort of thing with Now and Then, and if we had known you, then you would have been on it. But what was your opinion on Giles's, the new one?
It's crazy because I know Steve Genowick, who tracked the orchestra, and I know some of the players that played strings on it and stuff, and hearing the stories about them not knowing that they knew it was the Paul song, but they had the cameras and everything there. And I talked to Paula, who used to manage Capitol. She was the queen bee there, VP of the studio. and she was talking about how it was all NDA. No one knew what was going on. And I'm thinking, if I was on that session, I heard that melody miles away, I would know exactly what it was, because that track has been out since I had the Dakota demos bootleg CD in the 90s, which was all of John's demos from the Dakota era. And Now and Then was on there with that horrible buzz. Whew. But, you know, I was so excited but so nervous as well, because that first documentary video that came out the day before was pretty great.
That was so good. That was fantastic.
then
That was
the
the best
day
part of the
of-
whole project. Yeah.
I was so let down just with the idea of we really didn't need too much deep fake CGI face
God.
stuff.
Yeah, that was pretty
video.
bad.
That was
We
dreadful.
just didn't need it.
Yeah.
Like going back, which is odd because you look at, I'm okay with technology. I mean, look at Free as a Bird. Remember that music video?
Yeah,
Like,
but it
it's like-
works. It totally works with the
there's
song.
a story there. And
Yeah.
I can't even imagine if they re-clean that up, how cool that's going to look. But
Yeah.
even that still looks fresh now. And that was 1990s technology, digital. So it was hard to see because, you know, I'm a big fan of Paul's studio and trying to see as much footage as I can of that era of recording sessions and what they did. I don't think we needed too much other stuff. We had Real Love's music video, which was essentially like the Now and Then video, of just like the collection greatest hits of footage of everyone coming together. I don't think we needed John's deep fake looking over a river, but that you know, that picture, that was from a real picture
Yeah.
of his face, so you kind of knew that was from something. But
It was ridiculous. It was very cheesy.
we just didn't need the voices
Yeah.
making the faces, like Paul, who changed some of the words. It didn't need to be there. And certainly we didn't need that ending where like the time lapse of the faces changing. And
Would you have taken the bridge out?
oh, don't even get me started. See, that was the thing about why that was, I'm so excited to see how they were going to get around that, because of how long the track was and knowing the magic when it didn't come. And I had to play it again going, did I miss it? They obviously took it out for time, but then they added another solo and bridge part on their own.
Yeah. They actually posted
I-
the lyrics the night before on the video before it became live, and I was like, oh shit, they took it out.
Oh, really?
It was
Oh, they were
frustrating. I was so
preparing
excited for the
people.
track, yeah.
Well, that was the thing. The reason why the bridge, and maybe, you know, give me your opinion, but like I thought the reason why that song was special was that bridge that felt like it just kept going.
Right.
And then when it hit that chorus again, it was like the biggest release, because it felt like a key change almost, because it was just like going, and then, yeah, he didn't really finish the words, but why couldn't Paul sing the entire bridge
Well,
on his own?
I've seen some comment about this. They had very few options. They could do Paul's voice now, which we've heard not too
Right.
great. They
Right.
could do a DH Paul voice, which is inauthentic. They could have Ringo sing it, which would ruin the whole track entirely. They didn't have many choices.
But they could have, you know, John was singing harmony, melody, hymn stuff where he didn't have words. So they could have just turned that into the solo part.
Yeah.
Or orchestral part. But I do believe that bridge was like such a release to have it, and it's fine. I do like the song, and the mix is very different, and I have opinions about everything, obviously, but we're never going to be satisfied. At least I don't think I will be. Like, Get Back, as great as it was, I wanted different things. I wanted more because we're picky.
Peter Jackson wanted more. He wanted to do an extended cut, and they wouldn't let him.
He still does. Yeah.
They're probably going to put out an additional thing.
They're gonna wait till all the people who subscribed unsubscribe, and then they'll put it out.
I was one of them for a while, and then I got it again for Get Back or for Let It Be, and then I go, why did I do this?
Yeah.
I knew I didn't like this. I never liked it. I hated it when it came out. And I had it on VHS, And I did text Sam after watching. I was like, this was bad. Just such a letdown. Like it's just so dark.
They
and
should have just let it be.
Waka waka.
Oh.
Do 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 do.
Oh yeah, Let It Be is a horrendous movie.
It's just hard to watch because of
It's just sad.
it's just boring.
Yeah.
And obviously, I'm very amazed at like the story that Peter Jackson was able to create. You know, like the hiding the flower pot microphone with the Converse. I still think a lot of that is deepfake AI.
You think?
No.
Michael Lindsay Hogg said that was not like a covert operation. Like that was just a conversation in the kitchen where everyone was around.
Yeah,
Linda
Mal
was
was
there,
there.
Ringo,
Right,
yeah. So he made it seem a different way. But I don't think it was AI'd.
But no, what I meant was I don't think that it didn't happen. I believe it happened, and I believe that you could hear it, but I think that denoising and getting everything so clean, they had to fill cracks every once in a while with...
Yeah.
I might be wrong.
It was totally out of order too. The conversation. It was if you listen to
But
the
they had
original,
to create the drama and understanding what was happening, and Paul crying, and there was two, and him with tears in his eyes. I
Yeah.
don't think those tears were real.
Right.
I think that was put in, but it was a great story, and it made me go, "Oh man, oh."
Well, we know that they cleaned up the video for all of it, right? Like all 50 hours or something, right?
Big time.
So like
Huge difference.
someday, some guy will like take the bullet and just like either bootleg all that or like release it somehow.
He'll buy it.
Or
Well,
they'll
it's the
sell
same
whole
thing as there's footage of. There's a lot of stuff still laying around of
White Album.
a lot of things Beatle-wise.
The reunion
White
stuff
Album.
too.
The other
We saw
tank-
it
the-
now
the-
and then. Yeah.
Like the 14 hours worth of the reunion footage, yeah.
Yeah, I would love.
That
to
was
see
all
that.
like 5 different. They were obviously given those weird handheld hi-fi high 8 cameras, whatever they were, that looked incredible after they were denoised and stuff. I couldn't believe how good they.
Well, you know, that brings up a good point as well. We've talked about this on a previous episode, or at least I did, about the fact that Beatle collectors, when it comes to certain things, like I've heard certain recordings that nobody else has heard from other people. But because they save it, they buy it at a premium price, and they're like, nope, this is mine. I'm not releasing it. I don't want anybody else to hear it. This is mine. Nobody else will. You know, I mean, I understand it. But at the same time, it's kind of like history, and I feel like a lot of that should just be released.
What's interesting, like some of the stuff I remember in high school, I traded, believe this, a like really, I think it was one of the higher end. I don't know if they would consider a lithograph, but it was a Candlestick Park poster, and it was, you know, it was like $400 poster. It was expensive. And my aunt gave it to me when I was like 14 or 15 for like 4 years of gifts combined. She's like, I'm not getting you anything for like 4 years. This is it. And I traded it for like CDRs of Beatles MP3 bootlegs over the course of 3 years, and I regret it so much. But you go through all that stuff and you go, how are they doing bootlegs back then of like the Revolver session of, or like all the 40 different takes of Strawberry Fields or stuff like that? Who was getting those? There was obviously a mono machine going on in the background, similar to like Double Fantasy and Jack Douglas saying, I always had a machine going all the time. There's probably stuff out there that we have no idea about. What is the Carnival of Light track? Like all the tracks that we don't know exist that are probably still out. Maybe there's a real version of Madman.
You were saying there's also footage of Double Fantasy. There's a lot of footage, right, that has been released.
Well, there was a big video crew that came through and they said that it was all destroyed, and then somebody that, you know, that Revolver guy on YouTube popped up with one camera version of him playing that weird guitar, the ski rack guitar. And you know it's John because you can recognize his hands a million miles away, and then it pans up to him and he's wearing a baseball cap and everything. But, you know, you wonder about, I don't know if you saw recently, like, think about all the old Apple promo stuff that was probably floating around here and there that you've never seen anything of.
You talking about
Same
the
as
White
that
Album
one-
era, like Paul doing Helter
Yeah.
Skelter and Blackbird?
Or the most recent thing you saw of like that session of Blackbird where John and Yoko are sitting with George that I just saw for the first time like a year ago.
That was in the Now and Then video, or the one the day before, right? There's that one shot.
Maybe, yeah.
I hadn't seen that before.
So-
Yeah.
Paul, there's probably stuff.
Liam's account is posting outtakes from the Shindig performance.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
I had
Where did
never
those
seen
come
before
from?
too. I have no idea. I'd never seen that before.
Yeah, I'm glad that color footage. Mark, did you see that color footage from Ready Steady Go that just came out like a month or so ago? Got auctioned off.
No. Is that the stuff that's at the end of Now and Then?
No. This was like in the last month or two. There was a color footage reel of a like backstage of a Ready Steady Go episode in 1963 with Helen Shapiro and
Dusty.
Yeah, Dusty Springfield, and it's the video of them playing, like doing a rehearsal for the show in color.
Beatles?
Yeah, in like October '63. It's the first video of the new Hofner bass. That was kind of cool.
Wow, that's cool. I mean, I'm super fascinated about the Shea Stadium overdub stuff. That could be like a documentary on its own, figuring out, because you watch Help, and you know they're doing ADR, which is dialogue replacement, and Foley and everything. That's what you did in movies. You watch Help, and their mouth is never lining up. Like, they're so bad at doing that. But then you watch like the Shea Stadium stuff that's on like Anthology, and it's pretty spot on. And you're wondering, is this real, or did they never use the overdubs? Because it's not like the sound is great. It's horrible on its own. You can barely hear the drums. So if they did real drums, why doesn't it sound better? That's my opinion.
That footage looks really great too.
The footage, they have the film in New Jersey somewhere. They brought it out at the White Album conference. They're like, here it is. This is the Shea Stadium footage.
Let's go steal it. Let's go get it.
That's going to be obviously a big release one of these days, as like a movie or something.
Well, I mean, it already was. That's the whole reason it was filmed, because it was a TV special.
The Ron Howard thing, or the original?
No, I'm just talking about it was originally, like, I think Ed Sullivan might have been the one who commissioned it or something, but they'd like to have them film it, and it was like an hour-long TV special, or maybe it was just a half hour. But yeah,
this is off topic, but I was thinking about this the other day. You think about the kind of money those guys were making in the 90s, and even if John and Paul didn't get full publishing of all their music, Pete Best came out saying that he made like almost £2 million in the 90s just from playing on 3 tracks on the Anthology CDs. Can you imagine? Just as performance rights, what kind of money? It's just insane.
Well, isn't Paul a billionaire now?
Yeah.
yeah, he just
Well,
became
that's
that.
because he gave half of it. Well, that's British billion too. He was a American millionaire for a billionaire for a long time, but he also gave $500 million to his ex-wife in 2001.
Heather Mills.
$450 million.
Yeah, she got a good deal.
He had to reclaim it, but I just came out looking today that, trying to understand who owns all the real rights to the Beatles stuff, Sony and ATV.
Wasn't
And
there
understanding
that one girl that maybe when Sony, I can't remember when this was. There's some girl who like her dad owned Sony or something, and for her like 15th birthday or something, he said, I'm going to give you the rights to one Beatles song. Which one do you want? And she picked Penny Lane. And
Good choice.
And the dad was like, no, you should pick Yesterday. It makes more money. And she's like, no, I want Penny Lane. But like, I always
Can
get
you
confused
imagine?
about what that actually means, that she owns that.
Well, it's very confusing in the sense because there's master rights, there's publishing, there's percentage of publishing that always breaks down. There's performance songwriting rights. In reality now, and most rappers were protected because they had great lawyers to say, no, he gets everything, which is why they were making so much money on their first album and stuff.
I just found the,
During the era-
paragraph about it. In 1969, Beatles publishing company Northern Songs acquired by ATV, media company owned by Lou Grade. By 1985, ATV was being run by Australian entrepreneur Robert Holmes à Court, who decided to sell the catalog to Michael Jackson. Before the sale, Jackson allowed the rights for Penny Lane to be exempt from the deal and given instead to Holmes à Court's teenage daughter. As of 2009, Catherine Holmes à Court Mather was still the copyright owner of Penny Lane, which is one of the few Lennon-McCartney songs not owned by Sony Music Publishing.
Wow.
It's fucked up.
I never knew that.
It's really fucked
Wonder
up.
how much she made over time.
I mean, the idea is that, what's his name? What was his name who owned the publishing company?
Dick
James.
James?
Yeah.
Dick James, bald Dick James.
Fitting first name.
Yeah. Who,
Dick.
man, they were really nagging on Let It Be or Get Back. They really didn't like him, it seemed like. But I think, he was the one that totally screwed John and Paul for not telling they were going to sell their shares. So that was that really bad scene in John and Yoko, A Love Story. Remember that movie?
Oh God, yeah.
Where John's like cutting up heroin on his hand. He's like, I don't even own my own songs anymore. And that was 1969. At least there's one way to fly, Yoko.
Oh.
That's exactly the part where he's talking about that's when Northern Songs was sold to ATV. And you would think Alan Klein would see that coming and the whole shebang of what and how that panned out. And this the idea of, they which is why you never saw Paul playing live Beatles stuff other than a select amount. It's really messy because in that era, I mean, the Badfinger story, right?
Oh yeah, that was messed up.
Which is
Saddest
super
story
tragic.
ever.
Yeah.
Right. To two guys killing themselves because of it and losing everything. And they had so many hits. It's crazy how many hits they had. Nothing. And I'm sure there's some legal things set now, which is probably why Breaking Bad decided to give back that tune and use that as their final ending kind of end track.
Great way to end the show.
But it's weird because when I was in London, my very first time, my parents took my brother and I in the 90s, and which is crazy because my mom's cousin lived in Ascot. And like we drove by John's White House during that time. I remember looking at it. There was like a sale, and there was a CD sale on this like fair downtown London. And I bought a Badfinger disc, and it was basically what's his name who's still alive re-recording all the songs
Joey Molland.
in an 80s-esque version with like 80s reverb. I remember finding it. But it was all the songs and great songs. And it's funny because like they did that. Have you heard the YouTube video of like the rehearsals of Come and Get It where Paul's directing them to do the takes?
No.
And
No.
they're just awful because they're learning the song and Paul's like, no, play exactly like the demo. Exactly. Do not change. But then they have stuff like Without You, which is
You.
like massively good song.
Beautiful
All those
songs.
songs are so good.
Well, in the new Mal Evans book, it really goes into how Mal saw them at the Bag of Nails and pushed for Apple Records to sign them, and none of the Beatles said they were good enough, and they would just have to keep sending more demos, and eventually it took like 2 years for them to finally be like, yeah, let's sign them.
Apple didn't sign Crosby, Stills, and Nash either.
Bummer, man.
If only Mal was a fan of them.
Always going back to your guy.
I wasn't even trying.
Graham.
Mark, I have my my last question for you tonight.
Yeah,
and maybe
real quickly,
Sure.
I wanted to just add this about the Badfinger thing. Remember in the anthology when they were talking about the bands that they got for Apple Records, and they said the Ivies and Badfinger, which were the same bands. They had two different videos. They had Badfinger doing the in the house performance of Whatever Get You, and then they had the Ivies that were performing in the Apple recording studio in the basement. So you're thinking that's got to be 1970 when they did that. But they were considered the Ivies then? When were they? I thought they were Badfinger in '69 when they did the soundtrack for The Magic Christian. Super confusing. Just a thing for you guys to ponder. So
No
when you go
idea
back
about
to the
that.
anthology, you'll see that clip, and they're in as a performance. They had like the risers that they had for Two of Us, where they put Ringo on the drum riser. They had that up for the drummer and everything. And that's considered the Ivies.
This is why
And
the
that's-
anthology series is so, parodied, because it's like Ringo's like, I thought it was George, and then George is,
Right.
you should defer to Paul.
Michael, what were you saying?
Oh, sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, this is something I maybe should have asked at the outset, but for folks who don't know you and are seeing you for the first time, can you give us maybe a highlight reel of your CV, some cool projects you've worked on or favorite things you've worked on?
Oh,
You
I don't
got
know.
nominated for
I'm
2
terrible.
Grammys, right?
I'm terrible at talking about that stuff. It's easier to just go to my website and read who the guy that did my bio. It's just, I mean, there's some of the handful of magical moments, and we're working on some movie stuff. Or actually, this year I got to do the immersive mixing for the Joni Mitchell Newport album, which was cool because we did some of the other older Joni stuff, but this was like very special because it was her coming after she had her brain aneurysm and stuff, and that was like a big moment because I was mixing that with Ken Killay, who produced Rumors and stuff, and I've been doing a lot of stuff with Ken for almost over a decade.
And you got to work on that with her directly, is that right?
Well, she would come and listen to the stuff after. She would obviously come in and give her clearance and stuff. So all my job was to come in and just mix the stuff. And just hearing her voice, knowing that she was like 4 octaves lower than she used to be, but still just magic. So there's a handful of obviously projects like that. Like some of my magic memories of growing up were not even engineering. It'd be like an assistant or something. Like just really cool stuff, just being involved with stuff like that. And then there's stuff that no one's ever heard of that I still find equally as cool. But yeah, lots of stuff. I don't know. I'm not the guy that's like, yeah, here's the list of stuff. I mean, if you want to know, just go on IMDb or go on my site or something.
I'm trying to think of a way we can kind of, I feel like we could talk to you for hours, and I want to maybe find a way to end this in a meaningful way. And I was thinking like,
pull up my website. They do not.
Yeah. Maybe, talking about like, the mystery of things, it always gives me the chills in a good way. And I'm wondering like, if there was something that you could see, footage that is lost or doesn't even exist.
I want to know what that skull in the box was.
Explain for the people who don't
Dom, did you
know.
see that? You never responded to that email. I thought I scared you with that.
You're ending on a really eerie note here. Can you explain to the viewers what you're talking, or should we pull up the photo?
No, I don't know. So I was during my research of the Dakota. There's a lot of footage of Yoko in like early 80s being interviewed in her office, which was the office she had in the main floor of the Dakota. And on the piano, there's, just this human skull in a plastic box. And above it's a picture of John and Sean. And I don't know what that is, but I thought it was really weird.
Wasn't John
And
cremated?
I have no
though?
comment.
Like, don't we know he was cremated? It's not John's skull.
Sure.
is
She
it?
cut off.
I don't know.
It might be. It might be. I don't know.
It's pretty fucked up,
It's
man.
just really odd. That's
This
all.
is not good for all the Yoko haters. This is not doing well.
Everyone's gonna go scour the internet for it.
We're gonna get like a cease and desist from the Lennon estate, saying you're not to talk about this any further.
Or what
Very
about
possible.
a box set or some, I don't know, a song that hasn't been released, alternate take, something more positive than
Dan's trying to get this to more positive place.
I would like to see. I think you guys, everyone's going to be really excited about the Mind Games stuff that's coming out. I got to listen to a handful of that. My friend Alex mastered that at Abbey Road, and he played a handful of stuff when I was there. And I think there's stuff on YouTube that keep dripping out. That's just, it's because that record never really sounded great in the original source. And like, do you remember Lennon Anthology?
Yeah.
You can't find that anywhere.
gone.
That's
It's a
such
4
great.
CD box set.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's such amazing outtakes, and it was mixed so well.
It used to be on YouTube.
And they pulled it from there,
I
too?
think so, yeah.
Sam, you have it?
Yeah, I have it.
There's got to be I mean, I still have it on CD. I still have the box and everything. There's got to be a reason why it's not on iTunes. It's the only released John Lennon thing that isn't on Apple
it's
Music.
gone.
It's got Be My Baby on it, which is so good. That
Do you remember,
rock and roll session.
Paul, do you remember that? They put it out in like the late 90s.
No, I don't remember that.
It's essentially Beatles anthology, but just John.
No, I
for
remember
solo
that.
stuff.
It's in
Lots of
4
amazing
sections.
outtakes.
So the first section is Plastic Ono and Imagine, and then it goes to New York, and then it's like the in-between Lost Weekend, and then it ends with like...
Yeah, it was really complete. It was good.
Lots of great sounding mixes, and even the Mind Game stuff like Free the People just sounded amazing. And compared to the album, because the album is just mushy and dark. And
you get I'm the Greatest, too, with Ringo and Klaus and George. Great quality.
Bill Schnee recorded that. So that was who I learned under and worked under, Bill.
So he got to witness the reunion of the Beatles.
Yeah, he was the only one that ever worked with all the Beatles after
Wow.
they broke up. He has great stories about going to George's Friar Park and getting lost in the tunnels with Mal and George and all those guys, and going into Abbey Road and not allowed to touch, even though he was engineering the Ringo album. He was supposed to just be there to monitor. I think Alan Parsons tracked whatever they did for that day, but Ringo brought in first copies of all the Beatles albums and gave them to Bill and just started telling him stories. It's just like, God, I can't even imagine. But yeah, I remember I'm the Greatest. He played me that because Bill had a version of that. He did. But they just put another version out recently that sounds really good. So they must have remixed that because that was that era, 73. Mind Games is, I think, 73, right?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Which is weird to think because that's the same era as Dark Side of the Moon. Sounds very different for commercial music.
Mark, can I interrogate you for a second?
Yeah.
I want to... You never answer my question. I really want to know. I'm going to make it more specific. There's one Beatles alternate take or something, dialogue in the studio. What would you want to be released?
Does this have to be something that exists for sure, or like he can make it up?
It doesn't exist.
Okay.
Like anything from the Beatles.
I would really love to hear that Street of Dreams track that John Lennon wrote.
Wow.
A couple weeks before he died, because obviously that's special. I would love to see real footage of them during Rubber Soul in the studio. That doesn't exist. That would be magical, because thinking of all the footage and all the photos of Sgt. Pepper, you kind of get a little taste of what it was like, because there's so many photos that, I don't know, I feel like it would be interesting to see what they're going to do with Magical Mystery Tour as a movie. I've heard they're kind of tweaking stuff.
It needs tweaking.
Terrible movie too.
It's a hard watch.
Cut out the whole strip club scene. We don't need that.
You're right. Rubber Soul. We only have one day of photos from one day, which we constantly
Actually,
get
we
into in
did
this
realize
podcast.
there's a second day because there's those Drive My Car photos, but we don't know what day it is.
The George with the Strat, is that?
That's
maybe,
Revolver,
yeah,
isn't
but
it?
Paul has a casino in those too.
Sam, that is such a
I
good
think-
question. Can we actually all answer that?
Yeah, I've got an answer. I think.
I think my honest answer would be just more anthology. Do you guys know about the extended anthology?
It's on
that's
YouTube.
All audio?
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
Okay.
Wait,
Where
no.
it's
What is
like,
that?
It's like 30 hours or something.
I
can't
don't know if
remember
I know
how long
about
it
this.
is.
I mean, it
It
might
was-
be the
I was
stuff I
given-
already have downloaded effectively, but
I was given this years ago, and it's just audio, but it was basically the cut of the original anthology before they cut it down.
Whoa, that's cool.
Yeah, that
And
sounds
it's
cool.
it's an amazing listen. I'll have to put it up on my
yeah,
cloud
link
and
it
send
to
it
us
to you guys.
somehow.
It's pretty funny
'Cause I don't
because you
think-
can tell that like Paul didn't like how he looked in certain interviews because he retakes it on the boat, the tugboat, but says the
Exactly.
same exact thing.
Exactly. Same as the Ringo stuff, where half the time I'm like, is this an imposter? No, it's just Ringo intoxicated from the 80s. Because, he was was hanging pretty hard there for a while.
I think I would answer that. Well, Sam, am I allowed to say I want color footage of a specific moment?
Yeah, anything that doesn't exist or could exist.
Just because it's early and there isn't really color footage, I would love to see a video of them deciding on, well, like figuring out and deciding and recording the Hard Day's Night chord.
Oh, good answer.
Just
Very
seeing
good.
that whole
I would
process.
love to see a beautiful, if we're technology able to ever get there, a really good colorized Hard Day's Night 4K.
Oh, that's blasphemy, sir.
Yeah.
This come from a guy that understood they were shooting on Bolex and liked that artistic side. But of course, it's never going to look right because it never does.
Yeah, that never looks right.
They'll get there.
But it's just interesting to know that, like, yeah, I mean, I love Help and stuff, and it's interesting to see how the Blu-ray of Help, which wasn't 4K, you can just see their makeup. They're wearing so much foundation makeup that I believe that if they did Hard Day's Night, it's even worse because of how crazy those lights were in that studio and stuff. I don't know. I mean, I really enjoyed going back to it all, just like seeing them not being on. That was important to me. Like them being guys. You remember that big leak of that 24 minutes of the Think for Yourself vocal take? Mm-hmm. Everyone's heard it, but back in the 90s when I got it on my Winamp MP3 CD, it was amazing to listen to. And thinking about, like, there's got to be 100 hours of that.
There surely is.
Of them talking during rehearsals of vocals. And I haven't found anything else at that length of them goofing around like that. You know they're doing that every song.
Do you want to hold a penis?
They sing the Woody Woodpecker bit.
You know, it's so weird going when you spend time at Abbey Road, and a couple of days in, I got comfortable with being in the building, and there's the canteen, which, so if you leave out the door that's below the control room to leave the studio of Studio 2, and you hang a left, that goes straight into the canteen. To the right of the canteen is the bathrooms. To the right of that is the entrance to Studio 1. They're all really close in this hallway. So then you start putting your mind on, like, those moments where you know John went to go pee. He was just singing the part and he stinks too. I was waiting for someone. You got that old B.O. juice. Deodorant. But thinking about stuff like that, you start, for me, knowing how close everything is and being in this, like, area of like 15 feet and the traffic that was happening during the 60s, and you hear the stories of being like, I saw them passing in the hallway, and it's like, yeah, it's definitely, you know, it's like anything you see in real life. For the first time, it's smaller, or your memory of your house you grew up is huge and you go back and it's small. It's just, there's something real about, like, the canteen is still like a little cafe. It's a bar pretty much. And there's photos of, like, Pink Floyd in there and the Beatles doing the rehearsal for All You Need Is Love, which I still think is crazy. We need more footage of that. Mm-hmm. You know there is.
The other funny thing in the Think for Yourself audio is, it's weird because I don't know if this ever happened, but they talk about, like, someone says they want to schedule Ron Richards to come in and do stuff with them or something, which was kind of odd because I don't think he's on, like, any Beatles recording except for the very first, like, audition basically that they did.
Wow.
Who's Ron Richards? I'm sorry. I'm dumb.
He is the Hollies engineer.
Oh, shit. Of course he is, Ryan. Of course.
Actually, well, maybe engineer. I can't remember if he was at, like, George Martin's level.
Have you guys heard of this artist, Graham Nash?
No, but yeah, Ron Richards. I can't remember if he's an engineer or I think he was another producer. Let me look real quick.
While you look it up, Paul, what's your answer for the one Beatles unreleased, or possibly the one Beatles moment that if it were filmed you would want to see it?
Candlestick Park.
Oh, good answer.
That is crazy. There was nothing, huh? Just some high 8 or special home movie stuff.
Found under a bed.
That's a great answer. Wow. Like colorized, like 4K
Perfect.
candlestick.
Yeah.
But don't they have footage of that?
There's audio.
They have
I
like
think.
footage, I think maybe
But
of them
there's
leaving
like slow
in the
motion
vans.
footage of them singing with those collared shirts, and John has his sunglasses on in the anthology.
Well,
but it's
that
just
was,
slow motion.
That was, I think that
Budokan?
Same tour though.
The Germany.
No, that was. I know what you're talking about. That was. They were in a baseball stadium.
Oh, the
Right.
Philippines.
No, was it not?
It's
I know
definitely
what
the same
you're talking
tour as all that garbage
Yeah.
that was happening.
Real quick, I want to go back to this just so I can harass Michael real quick, because he's a fake fan. Ron Richards worked at EMI's Parlophone imprint as an assistant to producer George Martin, who recognized his potential as a producer. Richards discovered the Hollies and signed them to a recording contract with Parlophone in 1963. Produced most of the Hollies stuff, blah, blah, blah. At first,
He's that guy doing this in all the videos, taking time for all these artists.
Martin was not greatly involved with Parlophone's new signing, the Beatles, and Ron Richards was assigned to produce their first session in June 1962, which included Pete Best. It was Richards.
But that doesn't make sense because Brian Epstein went straight to George Martin because of.
Yeah,
I thought the head of or EMI went. The whole thing is
It's
weird because
confusing.
I've been listening to George Martin's.
It was Richards who originally considered that Best was unsuitable for recording work, although he was not very impressed by Best's replacement Ringo Starr. Richards hired session drummer Andy White, and Richards and Martin produced the Beatles' first single, "Love Me Do." And he suggested, "How do you do it?"
Oh,
So
God.
you're all fake
Horrible
fans for
song.
not knowing who Ron Richards is.
Well, I think I remember now what that was about. Reading, I think that was the time that the second time they came in.
Well, George had
wasn't
gotten.
there.
I think I remember seeing a talk by Mark Lewison or something, where the reason George Martin got stuck with the Beatles, I think, or maybe why he got stuck at EMI, which was like their sort of offshoot, like, or Parlophone maybe as a subsidiary of EMI, that it wasn't like this prestigious thing, and that he was like basically sent there as like punishment for sleeping with the secretary or something.
Probably, which she ended up marrying and staying with
Right.
for 49 years, or
Judy, I
80
think
years
her name
after.
was. Yeah.
Judy, yeah.
Anyways,
Hey
but
man, there would be no remixes with Giles if there was no Judy.
anyways, I only
be
brought
supportive.
Ron Richards up because in that Think for Yourself audio, George at some point says, "Oh, do you know if Ronnie's available?" Or he says, or Ron or something. Do you know if he's available tomorrow? Like, I don't know what he was gonna do because Ron Richards never shows up again in Beatles like recording history. I don't think, but maybe he was like, maybe George was gonna be gone a day and wanted to record something.
When did Chris Thomas come in?
Sometime
Album.
in 1968.
So there was that buffer between him needing another guy.
But this is in
Around.
late '65. We're talking about.
But you got to remember when Judy came in and substituted for George for when he had food poisoning? Did you ever hear about that?
Oh yeah, during Yellow Submarine.
I don't know if I know about this.
Yeah, it was the recording of Yellow Submarine where like someone, yeah, she came in.
To just babysit the session, and they just were like,
Well,
but she was there for the whole time anyways because she was with George all the way back to when they went to Sullivan because they went to New York and stuff. Yeah.
do any of you guys have other stuff you'd want to see or like clips you'd want to hear?
I do have something. Not necessarily Beatles related, but more Lennon related. I'd love to see everything from Double Fantasy.
Of course.
Everything. All the session
That might
tapes.
exist.
I think it does. I think it does, but someone's gatekeeping it, I'm sure.
I do know Jack Douglas recorded. Oh, that's my video. Jack Douglas recorded completely. I'm still talking. Jack Douglas recorded. I have a different camera I can turn on.
It's the CIA.
Hold on.
He's saying too much.
Jack Douglas is stop.
I
Pop
do
in a
know.
second.
Blank.
Hey.
Hey.
New angle. Hey.
Jack Douglas has a bunch of different like article/interviews he's done over the years saying that he recorded everything. He had microphones in the control room at all times, taking every rehearsal. You can hear a lot of that on YouTube. You can hear the rehearsals and stuff, but it would be nice to hear like an anthology version of all the or like almost like an evolution to the mix, which they're doing now, which maybe they will be doing because Double Fantasy is coming along in a couple years. They'll probably redo that after Walls and Bridges. So
pretty cool.
Anything is possible. Paul, did you say? Oh, you said Candlestick.
Michael, did you say?
Yeah, you're all going to kick yourselves for not saying this. 1966 NME Paul Winters concert.
You are so right.
Black turtlenecks, the SG,
SG.
I'd rather see Hard Day's
sunglasses
Night.
John's wearing.
I'm
Well,
more
you're a
interested
fake
in
fan,
studio
Ryan.
stuff. We got enough live footage.
No, but the SG.
You have
Ryan.
enough live footage.
The
Really?
SG.
Remember they did two versions of videos of Paperback Writer, one in Studio One, where they had the colored gels. They were talking to Sullivan and stuff. I'd like to see full versions of those redone because they have them
in 4K.
There's
4K
clips of
high-res.
the outside sessions on YouTube. There's like 10 minutes of it or something.
Which ones? The
park ones
stuff?
in the park or whatever.
Fascinating. Those look incredible. Like the stuff they put on Now and Then of those Michael Lindsay Hogg videos. If they did like full versions of those in 4K, wow, that's gonna look really neat.
Sam, what did you say?
I haven't said yet. I have one serious one and one. Well, okay. If it's Beatles, I want to see like something from 65 to 67, maybe like them messing with the fuzz pedal, like on Think for Yourself. We don't know exactly what fuzz box they use, so like them talking about it and messing around, it could be cool. But actually, Marc got it really in my head. There's a conversation between Jack Douglas and John the night he was killed, or and it's like this like famous thing that Jack will never talk about, but it was something really meaningful that John said to him, or spooky or something.
I think I think it was more premonition stuff because it was pretty
heavy
spooky.
stuff.
Yeah,
I'm curious what that was.
I mean, there's a lot of talks about that last week of recording Walking on Thin Ice, and I did get to talk to Rick Nielsen at Abbey Road because he was there too. It's just about when he came and tracked for him and Bunny did the
I'm Losing You.
I'm losing you.
Yeah. And then he ended up giving John the whatever that brand.
Les Paul. The Sardonyx.
No, the Hamer.
Hamer. That was supposed to look like the Rick and
the Rickenhamer. Yeah.
Yeah. But I was just asking him like, what was it? He was just explaining how like it was just so in and out and fast, and you know, you're listening to the record thinking, why didn't they get used? And I think the story was that Yoko didn't want. She's like, who are these guys? They're just going to write off the coattails. But the funny part was Cheap Trick was massive for like 5 years at that point. So it wasn't like they needed anything. But
and their version is so good too.
Very heavy.
Yeah, very heavy.
Very, very big and punchy. And I would just, I wish there was a lot more footage of that. You know, there's random footage of John and the not Hit Factory, but Record Plant doing some of the Walls and Bridges stuff, and some random stuff I saw last night of Mind Games era, of him producing Andy Peel or something in that 73 era, and it's just like, man.
I really want to see, Danny teased that they might do a box set of Bangladesh, and it'll be cool if they released the entire concert, both afternoon and evening, because we've never seen, I don't know, the original Bob Dylan set. I think they might have released the first set, but it would be cool to see the whole thing.
It's great. Well, guys, thank you so much. Awesome. I could go for another 3 hours. I've been wanting to do this with you guys for a long time.
You'll be back.
We'll have to do a part 2, yeah.
It's just
we'll see how this does.
Crazy to see how many people you've butted shoulders with.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, you and Clay can agree on this, is like you really get into a swing of it and it just becomes kind of part of your job. But there's never a moment where I'm just like, did that really happen? Like taking that for granted. It's so fun. But like the Beatles stuff going, like bookending our discussion, like I could not I don't know if I could mix anything Beatle related or work with them. That sounds horrible because I could probably shoot myself if they asked me, but it would be so hard to do that because of how special everything is. Because we all know every corner of every piece that's out there. At least I do, and I know you guys do the same. But like, I can tell you, Michael's right. When you're starting to do covers and stuff, you start kind of just not burning out of it. But like, I probably will never listen to the song "Girl" ever again after I do a proper mix and stuff, which will be cool because part of the video I'm doing is the performance, but then it's me doing like a little mixing tutorial about how I process it with plugins to make it sound more Beatle-y. And it'll probably sound nothing like it. No, I was just saying it probably sound nothing like it either.
Yeah, the good way to preserve the magic is to know when to stop, when to limit yourself. And on that note, I think it's a good moment to stop the episode.
Last thing I
That was a good
want to
segue.
see, I want more footage of Real Love and Free as a Bird.
Agreed.
And I would love to have a high definition multi-track of both. Because I know that there's track sheets out there for Real Love. And there's parts, Michael, that you played that I never knew existed on acoustic guitar, like the melody stuff, until you played it and I saw on a video. And then I heard the song again, and then you could barely hear it. I'm like, there's so much stuff going on, stuff like that, that eventually it'd be wonderful to see them figure out a way to release it. On that note.
Should we wrap it up then?
Yeah, well, thanks everyone for watching, and thanks for coming on. Hopefully we'll see you
Yeah,
again
thanks for
sometime.
joining us, Marc.
And
thank you for having me. It's only 1:30 in the morning.
So, yeah, we're all excited to see whatever new Beatles things will surface in the next 10 years or so. Because I'm sure they'll be
Very exciting stuff.
But, all right, well.
All right, guys.
Have a great night, guys.
Take care.
Thank you, Marc.
See you on the next one.
Thanks. Appreciate it, guys.
Hey, Marc.
All right. I'll see you later. Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.